G'day, mate. 40 here. So, breaking news. Apparently, the two agents who shot Pratty are on leave. Shocking. Breaking news. Well, anytime law enforcement shoots someone, the agents are placed on leave. So, I don't see why that's a news story, but this is the number one news story in America right now, that the two agents who shot Pratty on Saturday are on leave. So it's just so fake. There's not this big connection between the news and what is true. Anytime law enforcement shoots somebody, all right, the law enforcement agents are always placed on leave. So this is put forward as though it's something important, something shocking, something scandalous, that it just shows how out of touch and dangerous and reckless the Trump administration is now recognizing it's been, and it's now coming to terms with how wicked it is, and it's using this severe penalty that they're putting the two agents who shot and killed the guy on Saturday. They put them on leave. Oh my God, that's shocking. Who could believe that happened? Well, this is always the way things are done. I think anywhere in the developed world, in Australia, in England, in France, in Germany, in any advanced economy, whenever law enforcement shoots someone, certainly whenever law enforcement shoots and kills someone, whenever law enforcement discharges their weapon, they're always placed on leave. There's nothing unusual, there's nothing breaking, there's nothing shocking, there's nothing surprising about this. This is the way of the world. And yet it is presented as though, breaking news. The two agents who shot Pratty are placed on leave. Boy, these are tough sanctions, man. Now the Trump administration is really recognizing how ill-advised it's been. Yeah, this is how it's always been. This is how it was under Obama and President H.W. Bush and George W. Bush and Joe Biden, right? Whenever law enforcement discharges a weapon, right, they are always placed on leave. Not exactly so shocking. Right, Tucker Carlson is the most powerful person on the right. This is Jason Zengerle. I love his new biography.
I don't think
Tucker
is content to just be a podcaster. He has an ideological project at this point that I think he wants to see realized. And I think, J.D. Vance would be the vehicle for that.
Went over was could this little guy really hold on to power for the whole second term? And I kind of feel like we're at an inflection point on that right now.
Yeah, we might be. It is interesting the way Trump seems to be climbing down a little bit on some of these ICE actions. And, I saw that he was, he met with Noam and Corey Lewandowski last night at the White House, and Miller was not there for that meeting, which I thought was, I don't know what that means.
Yeah, guess what? The situation's in control. When ICE behaviors are highly unpopular, then Trump will have to respond to that particular situation. Oh, no. Right? When the majority of the public seems to be pretty clearly aligned against you, then Trump has to live in that situation just like the rest of us, right? We all live within contexts. We all have a life that is contingent on other people and other factors. What's most important will depend on the situation. The situation's changed, and Trump has to change with it.
Look, this is clearly something that Miller is behind. He wants. He's for all intents and purposes, he runs DHS, not Noam. So this is his baby. He's the one who's really the committed ideologue on immigration, much more so than the president. And I think, and Trump has, waffled here and there. You've seen him, supporting H-1Bs, things like that. The first round of ICE raids, when they went after agricultural workers, Trump, sort of seemed to want to back away from that before Miller stiffened his spine and he stuck with it. It'll be really interesting to see if Trump decides that Miller's a liability here and that his approach to immigration is a liability, because it's clearly, costing him in the polls. It seems to be costing him some support up on the Hill with Republicans. And this is what Miller wants. And, the entire kind of swaggering approach with that's Stephen Miller. And Trump, I think, was for that and was going along with it when it wasn't costing him. But now that it's costing him, yeah, I could see it being a tough time for Miller.
I guess my question is, when you were kind of reporting that out, something I just can't get my head around is like how Donald Trump tolerates being around Stephen Miller. He's not really the type of personality that Trump is usually drawn to. I mean, he's extremely off-putting. You could see Trump kind of wanting to give him a swirly a little bit. And so how does Stephen stay in his good graces?
He's just a really savvy bureaucratic operator. He makes alliances with people who he knows Trump is close to. The first term, sort of the best example of that, the way, he was Jeff Sessions and Steve Bannon's boy, right? I mean, that was how he came into Trump world. And as soon as Bannon and Sessions fell out of favor, he pivoted and he became, Ivanka Trump's boy.
How did he do that? Just brown nosing?
He helped her with, some of her own kind of policy, sort of projects, having to do with family leave and stuff like that. She didn't know anything about politics or policy or, the bureaucratic process. And he just kind of, gave her a hand and got in her good graces so that when the immigration stuff, blew up, especially with the family separation, she didn't, I think, she was opposed to it, but she didn't sort of criticize him personally as much to her father as she might have if he hadn't gotten in her good graces. And, this time around, look, he's an incredible sycophant. I mean, the way he talks about Trump, publicly, I don't know if you saw the Ben Terrace piece in New York Magazine this week about Trump's health, but, I think the title of the piece is a Stephen Miller quote, "The Superhuman President." That's just the way he talks about Trump, I think, privately as well. And he's just a sycophant around Trump. And I think Trump has a lot of sycophants, but for whatever reason, Miller's stuff resonates with him in a way. I think what you were saying about him being off-putting, and wanting to give him a swirly. Trump kind of does give him verbal swirlies, right? And hazes him, and talks about how, if you had your way, the whole country would look like you. Ha ha ha. It's an interesting relationship.
So Trump has gone into Minnesota and other places with a lot of force, and I don't get, why doesn't the Trump use means that are more effective and less polarizing, right? Why not just go with E-Verify? So Trump is sending all these gangs of heavily armed men wearing tactical gear and face covering into American cities to grab people off the street. And it's unpopular. It's not surprising that this has resulted in several deaths. It's not surprising that this is galvanizing massive left-wing protests. It's not surprising this is leading to sharply declining poll numbers. All right. Not surprising that this isn't a terribly effective way to deport people who are in the country illegally. So the primary argument for this tactic is theatrical. It's this will get us a good action video. But it's turned out to be a disaster, right? A far more effective policy would be mandatory E-Verify for all employees, combined with frequent audits, right? You don't need armed men in unmarked cars, heavy fines on offending businesses, right? That would dramatically reduce illegal immigration. Noah Carl makes this point in Aporia magazine. So why haven't the Republicans tried to push this through Congress? And the reason is it's overwhelmingly opposed by business lobbies. Right. And John Derbyshire quipped back in 2017, the desire for cheap labor explains 95% of U.S. immigration policy. The other 5% is sentimentality. So instead of just doing the theater of deportations, why not pass policies and pass mandatory E-Verify that would result in deporting and disincentivizing the presence of illegal aliens? And you wouldn't need to do it with all these theatrical displays of force. It's one example where this Trump administration seems to lack the competence, and that was my primary fear entering the second Trump administration. Will they show a lack of competence similar to their lack of competence in the first administration? And sending in all these armed gangs to deport people and pull them off the street just doesn't strike me as a terribly effective way to deport people. Let's instead use mandatory E-Verify. I think that would make a lot more sense. So Israel's in an interesting position. It has never been stronger. It has never been more secure. And yet, right, it has never been more unpopular. Now, being the underdog and being the victim, all right, that is a way to gain popularity. So you give me a choice between being strong and being popular, I'd rather be strong. So Israel's strong, Israel's feared, Israel has the most capable military in the Middle East. But Israel has never had less support around the world. So yes, Israel's the strong horse of the Middle East. It has hollowed out the command structures of Hezbollah and Hamas, the Houthis. It significantly reduced the threat from Iran. The economy is robust. We're looking at over 5% GDP growth in 2026. Inflation is cool. The shekel is basically at an all-time high. The defense sector is booming. But Israel is just massively unpopular around the world. It's unpopular on the left. It's unpopular on the right. And so what are going to be the various strategies to navigate this changing world? Yoram Hazony, a philosopher and the chief organizer of National Conservatism, has some thoughts in a speech he just gave
in Jerusalem. Their rivals, the Democrats, have largely made their peace with the anti-Jewish hatred of the neo-Marxists and Muslim Brotherhood supporters in their party. In fact, the influence of anti-Semites on the American left has become so blatant and so ubiquitous that most of my American Jewish friends have concluded that Jews have no future in the Democratic Party of Zoran Mamdani and Ilhan Omar.
Okay, that's silly. All right. The idea that Jews have no future. Most American Jews vote for the Democratic Party, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
And if the Republicans were to go down this same road, it's not clear what would be left of Jewish life in America. Over the past 18 months, the possibility that the Republicans, too, would embrace anti-Semitism has become all too real, with some of the most influential podcasts on the political right transforming themselves into platforms for relentless anti-Jewish messaging, not just arguing against Israeli policies towards Gaza or Iran, but for the explicit and savage targeting of Jews, Judaism, and Zionism on a regular basis. And so the question has been asked, it's been asked loudly and combatively by some of you here over the past 6 months, do these shows represent the future of the Republican Party? The Trump administration and its allies have been blindsided by these podcasts and by the Jewish outrage over them. For months, they largely failed to respond. But in recent weeks, the Trump administration has stepped in to impose order. On January 11th, President Trump took the clearest possible stance against anti-Semitism in his political coalition. Asked by the New York Times if he condemns anti-Semitism on the right, he said, certainly. And then he added, I don't think we need them. I don't think we like them. But then on January 16th, President Trump met with Tucker Carlson for lunch at the White House.
So what the heck is going on here? So whether it's Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens or Yoram Hazony or Donald Trump or J.D. Vance, everyone's operating within a situation where there are shifting political alliances and there are shifting incentives and the situation is constantly changing. So what is the most effective way to understand this? So Yoram Hazony is the high priest of national conservatism, and it is the attempt to reorganize and stabilize the right-wing alliance by giving it a coherent enemy map, a coherent moral language, a coherent elite coordination layer, all organized around American nationalism, and trying to create alliances between various nationalist movements in Europe, in Israel, and in America. So the old right-wing alliance in the United States was composed of people who wanted free markets, who were generally libertarian, religious trads, people who were nationalists, those who wanted the U.S. to intervene all over the world to support democracy, and those who were big lovers of liberal constitutionality. Right? That coalition has fractured. It's fallen apart. It lost its transitivity. Its various factions no longer support each other. So elites were all in with globalization, cultural liberalism, and free trade. But the mass base experienced from this status loss, cultural displacement, economic displacement. They lost their jobs, and they felt like America's institutions were aligned against them. So the number one tell for the Trump voter versus the anti-Trump voter is, how do you feel about America's institutions? If you think American institutions are fundamentally on your side, then you do not vote for Donald Trump. If you think that America's dominant institutions fundamentally not on your side, then you are very likely to vote for Donald Trump. So Yoram Hazony has come along and he's redrawn the ally-enemy map. So Yoram Hazony says our allies are nations, nationalists, trads, religious traditionalists, families, churches, armies, inherited cultures. Our enemies are the globalists, the transnational bureaucracies, the universalist moral regimes, the human rights industrial complex, the cosmopolitan elites, managerial liberalism, the left-wing non-governmental organizations. So Yoram Hazony is trying to fuse together a coalition in America, in Europe, in Israel, of people who are religiously traditional or populist, nationalist, post-liberal intellectuals, security hawks, anti-woke parents, statesmen who believe in nationalism and sovereignty, and business elites who are hostile to the professional managerial class and its intrusion with things like DEI and ESG and global governance. So these groups all share some grievances, but they lacked coordination, and Yoram Hazony is providing this with his conferences, his manifestos, his books. Right? He's creating a common knowledge of who we are and what we are fighting. And the core uniting principle is the nation state. So you need a coalition that cuts across class, is emotionally loaded, has historical depth, and can organize and inspire sacrifice. And that's what Yoram Hazony is trying to do here.
Which also arranged to have Tucker photographed together with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. And finally, on January 19th, Tucker aired a show in which he said some kind things about two Jews sympathetic to the administration, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and myself. And then he concluded by saying, "That's why I would never be anti-Semitic. You can't generalize." Now, these events are obviously choreographed to put an end to 6 months of nightmarish infighting on the political right, which makes sense. The Republicans are facing tough midterm elections in November, and they don't want to lose Congress.
So what Yoram Hazony, who is a philosopher, right, he is grounded in ideas. He's written, published many books on the Bible and on philosophy. He's a man of intellectual depth, and he's not talking here primarily, however, about ideas, philosophies, moral consistencies. He is engaged in a high-stakes struggle for coalition maintenance. So he's trying to realign the various members of the MAGA Republican American Nationalist Coalition. So he will identify here three distinct hubs within the Republican Party. There is the shrinking liberal wing, as epitomized by Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz. In liberal, as in the classical liberal, free markets, free trade. There is the dominant nationalist wing, embodied by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and the emerging alt-right or populist wing, as embodied by Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. So the cardinal failure of the liberal wing is its failure to engage properly with nationalism. So the liberals are lashing out at the nationalists, calling them Nazis or enablers, and so the liberal Republicans such as Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, they have lost their status. They are no longer gatekeepers. They can no longer enforce coalition boundaries. They're acting in a self-destructive and politically stupid way because they're ignoring the blunt reality of power. Nationalists are the new center for the American right. And so by attacking the nationalists, the liberal wing is exiling itself from the very alliance that it was trying to lead. Now, Tucker Carlson and his wing are a rising power on the American right. So he's not just a podcaster. He is a rival alliance builder. He is signaling to a different constituency. So Tucker is the most effective public speaker in American politics, certainly on the right. And his crowd is rising in confidence and in power and in influence. And then Yoram Hazony will have very bitter criticisms of his own in-group Jews for failing to properly engage with American nationalists.
Congress over anti-Semitism. The problem is that by now not too many Jews are likely to accept Tucker's disavowal of anti-Semitism at face value. Why? Because for the last 18 months, Tucker's interview show has become a circus of aggressive anti-Jewish propaganda. Anti-Semites know that you can tune into Tucker's show if you want to hear that Jews are a demonic force in history, the Jews have a plan to systematically destroy every Christian community in the Middle East, the Jews control the American government, the Jews shot Kennedy, the Jews propped up Winston Churchill financially so he could start an unnecessary war with Hitler, that the Jewish Bible is about revenge and genocide and doesn't teach us to be gracious to one another, that Christians who think Jews are God's chosen people aren't Christians at all, but heretics, and so on. There's much more of this, but you get the picture. These aren't normal political messages disagreeing with other members of the Trump coalition on legitimate policy issues. They're abusive, wild slanders, and their repeated appearance on Tucker's show has persuaded almost every Jew I know that the program's actual purpose is to drive Jews, along with tens of millions of Zionist Christians, out of the Trump coalition and out of the Republican Party.
Now, even if we had a President Tucker, that wouldn't make America physically unsafe for Jews. It would simply decenter Jews from the automatic moral elite of the country.
If that's not anti-Semitism, then what is? For at least 6 months, Jews...
So I think that reaction is hyperbolic. Tucker wants Christianity placed at the forefront of American cultural life, not Judeo-Christianity, and he wants American nationalism to guide American policy, not Judeo-Christian values, and he wants to make America choose its foreign policy interventions on the basis of primarily what's good for America, not on the basis of Israel occupying some sacred space in the American mind.
Jews and Zionist Christians have been saying that Tucker is one of the leading promoters of anti-Semitic propaganda in our time, and that for this reason he shouldn't be treated as a partner in good standing in the Trump coalition.
So I don't think it's fair to say that Tucker is one of the leading promoters of anti-Semitism. What Tucker does is he puts all sorts of Jewish skeptical or anti-Jewish people on his show, not so much because he supports the anti-Jewish things that they say, but to flip the middle finger to our ruling elite and all their restrictions that they want to make on speech. So Tucker is saying, I am not going to allow the elites to determine who I can talk to. It's not that Tucker is trying to promote anti-Jewish ideas. Now, in the course of putting on all these anti-Jewish guests and promoting them, yes, there's probably an upshot of a promotion of anti-Jewish ideas, but I don't think that's what's driving Tucker. He's saying, I will not be handled, I will not be muzzled, I will not be censored by the ruling elite, I will not have my thinking curtailed. This is how wide open I am, I'll talk to anyone. It's more of a wide open anti-censorship attitude, I think, for Tucker, rather than wishing to promote hatred of Jews.
They said this to Charlie Kirk. They said this to Kevin Roberts. And they've been saying it to the Trump administration. So how's this effort to distance Tucker from power and influence the Republican Party going? Judging by President Trump and Secretary Rubio's photo op with Tucker in the White House 2 weeks ago, I'd say it's been a total failure. How do we explain this defeat? Well, one possibility is that Tucker's just too powerful. No one's going to touch him politically right now.
So right now there are all sorts of incentives for the Tucker Carlsons of the world to host people with Jewish skeptical and anti-Jewish ideas because it shows that you're edgy and that you refuse to bow down to elite restrictions on speech. Now, these incentives will change one day. In this current situation, there are all these incentives to engage with these anti-Jewish activists. But this is a momentary situation, and it will change. And it's not inevitable for a populace to be anti-Jewish.
Tucker is an influential supporter of the Republican Party. The Republicans need him to win elections, and that's just the way it's going to be. A second possibility is that Jews and Christian Zionists are just too weak in Republican circles to take him down a notch politically. A lot of people have the idea that Jews are connected all over the place in the Republican Party, but maybe that view is not exactly right. I'll come back to this point in a moment. A third possibility is that Jews and Zionist Christians have plenty of connections in the Republican Party.
So Yoram Hazony will call for Jews and for Zionist Christians to engage with nationalism, stop sitting outside the nationalist camp, stop accepting the distorting medium of the mainstream media, look for common ground. So there are plenty of places where American interests and Jewish interests and Israeli interests align with American nationalist goals, such as with developing industrial policy, with stop automatically following the dictates of free trade, but instead reorient the American economy and American trade policy on the basis of what will promote the most dignity and the best living conditions for American workers, increasing skepticism of foreign wars. Right, this is something that Jewish nationalists, American nationalists, Zionists can have in common. So look for rock-solid, mutually beneficial alliances to ensure survival within the new dominant nationalist group. This is what Yoram Hazony is saying. Stop being so pious. Start becoming political, right? If you do not integrate into the nationalist alliance, right, you'll be outcompeted by the alt-right, which is already becoming highly effective at delegitimizing Jews, Jewish nationalism, and Zionism. Now, how do Gentile nationalisms affect Jews? And how does Jewish nationalism affect Gentiles? When you have an intensifying of an in-group identity, such as with nationalism, then it causes people to more closely align with their in-group and to have more negative feelings about out-groups. Now, most American Jews are American first and Jewish second. And you can see that by they choose to live in America. They don't choose to go live in the Jewish state. So if you are, say, living in America and primarily you are Jewish first and American second, yeah, there are going to be some tensions with an American nationalism. But given that most American Jews are American first, Jewish second, just as most American Christians are America first and Christian second, there is considerable common ground. So Gentile nationalism can be the ultimate act of exclusive coalition building, but that's only if Jews and other minority groups choose not to primarily identify with their nation state. It's a very dangerous thing for a minority to publicly advertise that they put another identity ahead of their national identity, ahead of the state that is on their passport. So nationalism can become so intense that it becomes a closed alliance, and if you don't share blood, language, or history, right, then you are outside. But nationalism is complicated. It has many strands. It will always have a civic strand, a cultural strand, a religious strand, a racial and ethnic strand. And so you can integrate into some of those strands if you're not part of the blood and soil contingent. And there will be other parts of nationalism to which you can't integrate.
But that the case against Tucker over the last 6 months just wasn't presented in a way that was professional, serious, and competent enough to be persuasive. Sure, many of you think that Tucker is...
And I'm having a look at the chat, and Inhumane Society says, I'm emotionally exhausted and embarrassed to be Jewish. I said, why? He says, our Constitution is not negotiable. So do you mean the Torah Constitution? Do you mean the American Constitution? Well, guess what? Both the Torah Constitution and the American Constitution are negotiated every day. So even if you believe that both the American Constitution and or the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, even if you believe that each of these documents springs directly from God, they still have to be negotiated every day because the situation in which these divine or binding documents find themselves is having to continually apply to a changing situation. So you can see these documents as holy and still recognize that they are being negotiated every day because the situation is changing, and how you apply these documents in a changing world will constantly have to be discussed and negotiated. Now, you may find that tiring. It is the nature of reality. So if it becomes too exhausting, then just check out from that and love your family, love your friends, develop your education, develop your profession, work hard, make money, pursue your hobbies. There are so many other identities that I would assume you have open to you, right? You don't have to focus on negotiating Torah and modernity or the American Constitution in 2026, right? You should only worry about that if it is stimulating to you, right? I find it stimulating to discuss these ideas. If I were exhausted, tired, worn down by these ideas, I would pay attention to something else. To me, it's not terribly complicated. So what is so tiring? All right, I am a USA infantry veteran. All right, so for you, the American Constitution is not negotiable. What does that mean precisely? Why are you exhausted? Why are you feeling so emotional? Why are you embarrassed to be Jewish? Give me more details. I'm curious.
The leading promoter of anti-Semitism, and that the Trump movement should just ditch him. But that's obviously not what President Trump thinks about Tucker, who did extraordinary work building up the Trump movement over his 7 years as host on Fox News. And on top of that, Tucker is a very smart, passionate, and very likable man when you meet him in person. I had lunch with him once, years ago, and I thought he was great. I invited him to NatCon 1, and he gave one of the best speeches that we've ever hosted.
So both Yoram Hazony and Tucker Carlson say very nice things about each other.
And Tucker has been saying, as clear as the day, that he is not an anti-Semite. Now, if you think otherwise, you're going to have to convince people. You have to make your case in a persuasive way.
Okay, just look at the incentives. Look at all the incentives for Tucker Carlson to follow the metrics, to skate where the puck is going. Right? Tucker Carlson, for many years, goes where the incentives lead him. And there are all these incentives to host edgy figures. So I just don't think you can find many examples of Tucker Carlson speaking in terms of hatred of Jews. What he does do is put on heretics and rebels and people who have negative, hostile critiques of Jews, because Tucker wants to show that he will not be silenced, because Tucker noticed circa 2016 that his fiercest critics, his biggest enemies, and Donald Trump's fiercest critics and fiercest enemies tended to be Jews who were Zionist. And so all these very smart, very effective Jews who started criticizing Tucker Carlson and criticizing Donald Trump and trying to make their lives as difficult as possible, they may have overplayed their hand. And in trying to shut down Tucker and trying to shut down Donald Trump, right, they've incentivized someone to have a great deal of negative feelings about them. So not a good idea to unnecessarily alienate people. And in your drive to shut people down, you may well trigger something that becomes monstrous to you.
To people who don't spend a whole lot of time watching podcasts, have Tucker's critics done that? Well,
okay, Inhumane Society says he's an infantry veteran. He's feeling very emotional. He's exhausted. He's embarrassed to be Jewish. And he says 340 million Americans versus 8 million fake chosen pussycats. Good luck, my chosen. Well, guess what? Out of 340 million Americans, about 5% at most are interested in politics. So there's no incentive, there's no platform, there's no bridge right now for America to be going to war with Israel. That's not even a possibility. I don't know why you're getting so emotional about it. And you are upset that some Jews think that they're God's chosen people. Well, are you upset that the Japanese think that the sun rises first on Japan? You're upset that China regards itself as the center of the world. Every single people in the world regard themselves as the center of the universe. Does that upset you? Does that get you really emotional that every single people in the world regard themselves as special? Do you get emotional and exhausted thinking about how every individual puts himself at the very center of the universe? Or do you only get emotional and exhausted when Jews do it? So when Gentiles do the identical thing, that's fine with you. But Jews, they can't do what everybody else in humanity does. That really upsets you if Jews act like everybody else in the world. That's so upsetting. That's so emotional. That's so exhausting. How dare Jews regard themselves as the very center of the universe when every single other individual and every single other group does it? But if Jews do the same thing as the rest of humanity, that's really exhausting for you. That's tiring for you. That really wears you down. That really upsets you. That annoys you. That triggers you. Like, how dare Jews operate with the same psychological and physiological tendencies as the rest of humanity? Oh, oy vey, that is so upsetting. No wonder you're so worn down, my friend.
Well, if they have, where's the 15-minute explainer video that I could show to my friends on the political right in Washington
Yes, good luck. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your concern. Yes, it's really... I feel so fragile right now that Jews may share the same physiological and psychological and social and cultural tendencies as the rest of humanity. That just makes me feel so vulnerable, so triggered right now, so scared that Jews and non-Jews both regard themselves as the center of the universe. Both Jews and non-Jews regard their group, their in-group, as the best. That Jews and non-Jews both believe that they have some special contribution to make to the world. That is so frightening to me. I'm getting so emotional about it. My God, what piercing insights you have. You have smote me, sir. You have smote me. Tell it not in Gath. Do not let the uncircumcised hear your insights.
Which proves this very serious accusation against Tucker. Where's the carefully assembled research with links and dates and timestamps that could convince an impartial public figure who is open to being convinced? Where is it?
Well, people don't make their political choices and their coalitional choices on the basis of truth. Now, if they want to make a choice, it helps to have something offered to them that can then create a justification for them to go where they want to go.
The answer is there is no such 15-minute explainer video. There is no such serious research. They don't exist because for some reason there seem to be no Jews or Zionist Christians who think it's their job to produce such things. Or if there are people who...
Politics is not driven by facts. It's not driven by deep-held moral principles. It's not driven by philosophical principles. It's not driven by logical arguments. Right? Politics is driven by coalitional alignments. And different groups have different interests. And so at times, the United States and Israel will have interests in common. At other times, the United States and Israel will have interests that completely diverge. There will be times when Jews and Christians have things in common, and there will be other times when Jews and Christians are at loggerheads. There will be times when American liberals and American conservatives can make a common cause, and then there will be other times when they will have passionately differing incentives. There will be time when bosses and employees have similar incentives, and then there will be other situations where bosses and employees have incentives that push in opposite directions. The world's a constantly changing, complicated place.
Think it's their job. They haven't circulated anything of the sort, not to me or to anyone else in Washington who's in a position.
So Tucker is not his guests. Tucker is not exempt from his guests, but he is not co-equal with his guests. If a guest says something horrific on Tucker Carlson's show, and he shows that does not automatically mean that Tucker Carlson is aligned with whatever is said. There is such a thing as guests, and there is such a thing as a host. A host is not 100% responsible for what his guest said. He's not 0% responsible either.
To do anything with it. This is an extremely high level of incompetence by the entire anti-Semitism industrial complex, some of whose representatives are sitting right here in this room.
So, by the way, if you're really into your Jewish identity, you're really into traditional Judaism, you love the Torah, right? There's absolutely no precept, there's no commandment, there is no divine obligation to go out there and fight anti-Semitism, right? The more aligned you are with Torah and the traditional Jewish way of life, the less interest you have in fighting anti-Semitism. There's no Jewish tradition of fighting anti-Semitism. It's a gay, made-up activity for people who don't have anything real in their life and they want to feel moral and connected to something Jewish, so they make up this bogus gay crusade to go out there and fight anti-Semitism, right? You encounter someone who's a professional fighter of anti-Semitism, they're a huckster, right? They're a shyster, they're a race man, they're a con artist.
Maybe some of you think you were persuasively fighting anti-Semitism over the last 6 months, but the unfortunate truth is that you were not. Let's go back to the question of how well-positioned Jews and Zionist Christians are to have a say in the Republican Party today. Right now, the party is divided into three wings. First, there's what I'll call the liberal wing of the Republican Party, which is led by figures such as Lindsey Graham, Mike Pompeo, Ted Cruz.
Okay, so Inhumane Society says in the chat, F Israel. Well, guess what? if you have certain life experiences, if you have certain knowledge, or if you have a certain perspective, all right, you will be more or less friendly to the Jewish state. All right, if you have 10 terrible interactions with Zionists, or you read 10 devastating critiques of Zionism, then you're likely to be hostile to Zionists. If you have 10 terrible interactions with black people, you're more likely to be hostile to black people. If you have 10 horrible interactions with Christians, you're more likely to be hostile to Christians. Right? Life is tough, and we are wired to love our allies and to hate outgroups. And so if Israel and Zionists are an outgroup, or if African Americans are an outgroup, or Muslims are an outgroup, or gays are an outgroup, or white Christians are an outgroup, right, you're very likely to have substantial negative feelings about them. So life drives us to find allies, and the easiest way to find allies and to have good relations with allies is to share hatred of outgroups. Nothing bonds you like a shared hatred. Right? You're going to bond with your fellow employees over your shared hatred of the boss. If you live in a high-crime neighborhood, you are very likely to bond with people such as yourself if you hate those who are committing a disproportionate amount of the crime.
This liberal wing once dominated the Republican Party, but since 2016, it's been shrinking. And it's unlikely that a candidate with liberal Republican views would win the support of more than 25% of the party's primary voters today. Second, there's the nationalist wing of the Republican Party, as represented by President Trump, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth. This camp is distinguished from liberal Republicans by its support for industrial policy.
But nationalism is the most powerful political force in the world for 200 years, and I don't see much indication it's going to become less powerful. So nationalism means intense in-group identity, where your group is your extended family, so broadly conceived as to be your nation. And as you intensify in your nationalist identity, this will cause you to have increasing skepticism and negative feelings about other nations. So nationalists don't all tend to live together in peace. So rising Polish nationalism and rising German nationalism often leads to some negative feelings about each other, even conflicts, even war. So there are adaptive advantages to a nationalist perspective on life, and there are adaptive advantages in different situations to a more globalist or liberal or socialist perspective on life. It's not like, oh, there's just one political strategy for navigating life that has just proven itself superior to all others in every single situation. No, when the situation changes, the political strategy for navigating that situation will change. In one situation, a nationalist strategy will be most effective. In another situation, a socialist strategy will be more effective. In another situation, a free trade, free markets, free mind strategy will be more effective. In another situation, a top-down xenophobic police state will be more effective. Sometimes the best way to navigate a difficult situation is to build your empire. Other times you'll be incentivized to retrench and just protect your nation state.
Industrial policy to restore America's manufacturing capabilities, its outspoken rejection of compromise on immigration issues, and its skepticism of long foreign wars. The nationalist camp today represents the great majority in the Republican Party, with a likely vote share of 65% or even higher in a contested primary.
So I love nationalism, but that doesn't mean that nationalists are cuddly. That doesn't mean there aren't certain inherent blind spots that come with nationalism, that a lot of people may want to wage unnecessary wars because they're just so in love with their particular in-group. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges, that it doesn't create gnarly situations, gnarly conflicts, and unnecessary wars sometimes. Right? Nationalism is dangerous. Globalism is dangerous. Liberalism is dangerous. There is no one political approach to life that is without danger.
And finally, there's the alt-right, the alternative right, which was mostly a fringe phenomenon until 2023, when big-name public figures Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens moved into this space. Still, it's unlikely that.
So I think it'd be more accurate to call Tucker Carlson and company populist nationalists. So Yoram Hazony is willing to try to find as much room as possible to cooperate and find common ground with populists, but he's much more of an intellectual nationalist and a religious, cultural nationalist. The populist nationalist believes that wisdom resides with the people. Yoram Hazony is a member of the elite. He believes that sometimes wisdom resides with the people, but wisdom also resides in the sacred text and in learning and in cultural traditions that have proven themselves over millennia, and that people who are more learned, more studied, more experienced sometimes will have insights and wisdom that the populist masses will not have. So I just don't think you can call, I don't think alt-right is a particularly effective term for Tucker. I'd call him populist nationalist, and Yoram Hazony more traditional nationalist.
That more than 10% of Republican voters would support a presidential candidate with alt-right views. As you know, liberal Republicans...
Tucker Carlson's incredibly adaptive. Tucker Carlson will skate to where the puck is going. So if Tucker Carlson sees a way to advance himself and his interests, he'll change, he'll transform. Right, we're probably looking at a 10% chance of Tucker Carlson becoming president of the United States, even possibly in 2028. And if Tucker Carlson becomes president of the United States, there's not going to be some massive pogrom on Jews. Jews aren't going to get beaten up and slaughtered en masse. Right, there will be a certain loss of cultural and moral capital and privilege for Jews and Zionists under President Tucker Carlson, but there will also be many opportunities to find common ground.
They're very supportive of Jews, Judaism, and Israel these days. We should thank them for it. Whereas the alt-right is strongly anti-Semitic now.
Now, the alt-right is strongly anti-Semitic right now. If the situation changes, right, the alt-right could become much more anti-Muslim than anti-Jewish. Situation changes, it might become more, I don't know, anti-Mexican, anti-Chinese, anti-Japanese, anti-Europe, right? Who your enemies are depends on the situation. There are no permanent friends in the world. There are no permanent enemies, right? Nations have to look to their interests, and their interests change as the situation changes.
That leaves the nationalist wing, which has been pretty quiet on these issues over the last 6 months, leaving the whole noisy shooting match to be fought out between the liberal wing of the party and the alt-right. So it's been Mark Levin or Ted Cruz, for example, dishing it out and taking it from Tucker Carlson week after week, month after month.
And sometimes I think, oh, Tucker made a better point there. And sometimes, God forbid, maybe even Mark Levin or Ted Cruz made a better point. It's not as though either one is just gifted with the mandate of heaven to always be right. So for a couple of years, I went to Kundalini yoga almost every single day. But when I'd get sick or when my schedule changed and I didn't make it to yoga for a while, then when I stepped back into Kundalini yoga, it seemed strange. Or if I was sick or otherwise engaged and I didn't make it to synagogue, say, for 2 weeks, then stepping back into an Orthodox synagogue is strange. When you don't have interactions with Jews or with Zionists or with Kundalini yoga aficionados, right, anything that is not familiar to you will seem strange and disturbing because the human default is to say no. Right? That's how we're wired. If something's at all disturbing or sufficiently different or strange, we're just wired to go, oh, no, I don't want any of that.
However, the struggle for the soul of the Republican Party is not taking place in these overheated, firing squad-style online confrontations between the liberal Republicans and the alt-right. The actual battle over the future of Jews in the Republican Party is taking place where the majority is, within the big nationalist camp at the center of the party. Now, many Jews, including some Israelis, mistake the online fights for political reality. And so you get all these Jews jumping on the bandwagon and amplifying the rhetoric and arguments coming out of the liberal Republican camp. They think that by retweeting Mark Levin, they're somehow fighting anti-Semitism. But they aren't doing anything of the kind. And that's because nationalist Republicans aren't too inclined to trust the arguments and rhetoric of the liberal camp on too many issues, including this one. In fact, most nationalist Republicans still remember how liberals spent 10 years falsely accusing President Trump of anti-Semitism. And so it's not surprising that they find the overheated rhetoric coming out of the liberal camp on the subject of anti-Semitism to be bellicose, alarmist, and unconvincing. For example, most nationalist Republicans don't think America today is anything like 1930s Germany. They don't see any Nazi party in America poised on the threshold of victory. And for that reason, they don't jump to deplore the agitprop of right-wing podcasters the way liberal Republicans would like them to.
So if the only true German is someone whose ancestors have lived in Germany for hundreds of years and is a Gentile or a Christian descendant, then obviously that type of German nationalism can never include Jews. For centuries, even though there would be Jews living in Germany or Jews living in France, they were regarded as guests, essentially, and it was considered inconceivable that they could ever be proper Germans or proper French. That was the Jewish question. Can Jews become part of a nation state? Now, the Jewish question is not something that's taken seriously by 95% of people today. It's not even a consideration, can a Jew be an American? But blood and soil nationalism will tend to exclude Jews, and nationalism will always include a component of blood and soil. Now, that component may be small, it may be large, it may be stated, it may be unstated, it may be disguised as cultural or religious or civic nationalism, but maybe the power, the real drive is the blood and soil component. And Zionism, right, that is an example of a blood and soil nationalism. It is a connection to your ancestors, to your people, and to a particular land. So nationalism will always contain all these various components. Blood will always be a key component of nationalism. It may not be number one, it may not be number two part of nationalism, but it will be in the top three. Soil will always be essential to nationalism. It will always be a top three component. Then a certain culture, a certain religious attitude, right, and a certain civic mindset will also be a key part of nationalism. So in reaction to rising Gentile nationalisms in the 19th century, Jews developed their own nationalism, right? They developed Zionism. Zionism is simply Jewish nationalism. And it's kind of weird if you think nationalism is great for everybody, but not Jews, right? Nationalism is wonderful for every single people under the sun, except Jews. Somehow it's perfidious, it is evil, it is rotten when Jews participate in the very same nationalism that drives hundreds of other peoples around the world. So when Jews face rising Gentile nationalism, how do they react? Well, there is the bridge building strategy, right? You seek where you have things in common, where you can form mutually beneficial alliances with the dominant nationalist group. You look out for where you have shared interests. And then there's the sovereign strategy, right? You look to build up your own nation state. You move to your own nation state of Israel. What is not a viable strategy is to live in a Gentile land, but publicly announce, hey, my Jewish identity comes first, right? You suggest that you have any other primary national loyalty than the nation state that is on your passport, and that is not a viable strategy. Now, there will be awkwardness when the non-Jews increase their in-group identity, when they increase their nationalist yearnings and connections. There will be some awkwardness for Jews, just as Jewish nationalism creates challenges for non-Jews. Right? Anytime an in-group identity intensifies, right, it then has effects on people outside of that in-group. Now, for people who just instinctively distrust nationalism, distrust ties of blood and soil, they have long embraced a liberal universalist outlook, right? Why can't we have a world where we're primarily individuals, where identity is private, where we can gather together those things that are most important to us internally? We can decide what is right and wrong. We can strategically, autonomously, rationally plot our way forward as individuals in our buffered identities. And it's a useful fiction, but reality is we all have a porous identity. And most people are going to feel tug to blood and soil nationalism, to cultural, religious, and civic nationalism. And the idea that we should all be just primarily individuals, there are advantages to taking on that fiction, but it is not mirrored by reality. We don't tend to see people as individuals unless we know them. Otherwise, they're members of outgroups. They just have an essence. So if Muslims are an outgroup to you, then you just think of Muslims as just like one essential entity. If Jews are an outgroup to you, you just think of Jews as possessing one essence. If black people or brown people or yellow people or the Japanese or the Chinese or Christians are all members of an outgroup to you, then you just think, oh, Christians, they share this essence. In reality, there's no essential, unchanging component to any identity. Right, there are many different Jewish identities. Jews have acted differently in England in the 1930s. Right, Jewish groups in England in the 1930s were more resistant to England allowing in immigrants than the Gentiles in political power. So sometimes Jews will be allied with pro-immigration forces. Sometimes Jews will be the leading immigration restrictionists, such as Stephen Miller. American Jews, right, primarily American, and the proof is they choose to reside in America, not in the Jewish state. This is the ultimate signal of where most American Jews find their primary loyalty. So the United States has been the most successful and hospitable alliance hub in Jewish history. They live in America. They affirm a social contract that values people as individual citizens. They enjoy economic, social, cultural opportunity, and they prefer this freedom and opportunity to the ethnic, national, religious mission of the Jewish state. So probably 70% of American Jews feel some sort of emotional attachment to Israel, but only a tiny number, like well under 1%, ever choose to move Israel. So in the clear hierarchy of needs, American Jews overwhelmingly need America and American identity and life in America over the potential to live a more fully Jewish life in the Jewish state.
And when they don't, this drives liberal Republicans, both Jews and non-Jews, to start misbehaving. They start lashing out at nationalists, accusing them of being anti-Semites or protecting anti-Semites or protecting.
And the chat says Israeli Jews don't represent global Jews, or you could reframe that, Israeli Jews don't represent globalist Jews. Well, there are many Jews, particularly the most educated, the most intelligent, and the most accomplished, the Ashkenazi elite in Israel, who do feel much more aligned with universalist moral principles and universalist liberal outlooks and the European outlook on life and international human rights standards. Right, the most educated, highest IQ, most successful Israelis tend towards this globalist perspective. Most Jewish Israelis do not. Most Jewish Israelis tend towards a much more nationalist and tribal perspective with a great deal of skepticism about international human rights organizations. So those American Jews who are the most strongly Zionist are also the most likely to support President Trump, to support MAGA, to support the populist nationalist agenda, and to support building a wall to keep out illegal immigrants. So those Jews who support immigration restriction and the expulsion of illegal immigrants, right, if they're in the United States, right, they will support MAGA. If they're in Israel, they'll vote for right-wing parties. So for some Jews, their left-wing commitments are more important than their Jewish tribal commitments. And it doesn't make them bad people. You're not a bad Jew or a bad person if your socialist commitments, your globalist free market, free minds, free trade commitment is stronger than your tribalist commitment. So just as there are Christians for whom their American identity is more important than their Christian identity, and then there are Christians for whom their commitment to socialism is greater than their commitment to Christ. Okay, people are complicated. Jews, Christians have many different directions, but overall, Israeli Jews tend towards a much more pragmatic perspective on life, a nationalist perspective on life, while the most highly educated, most successful, highest IQ Jews and non-Jews will tend towards a more globalist, liberal outlook on life because they have the most mobility. It's easy for them to get up and move to London or to Los Angeles or to Munich or to Tel Aviv, right? They consider themselves more citizens of the world. They may primarily identify by their profession, and they may feel quite uncomfortable with those who are primarily nationalist or tribalist in their outlook.
Nazis or being Nazis, I've heard all of this with my own ears. It's a disgrace. And if the goal is to persuade Trump's nationalists to build an alliance with Jews on these and other issues, it's also counterproductive. In 1999, I invited Irving Kristol to deliver a public lecture in Jerusalem. His topic was the political stupidity of the Jews. His thesis was because Jews don't have a living tradition of thinking about political power, we tend to respond to political situations by pronouncing moral judgments, as if pronouncing moral judgments in an agitated way was going to win us friends in high places.
So there are plenty of American Jews for whom their primary identity is doctor. And there are other American Jews for whom their primary identity is MAGA, or American nationalist, or socialist, or their primary identity is that of a scientist or a journalist. And so too with non-Jews, right? Plenty of non-Jews in America for whom their primary identity is evangelical Christian, and then there are other non-Jews for whom their primary identity is philosopher or a computer technician, right? Some people put their profession first, some people put their tribe first, some people put their theology first, some people put their culture first, some people put their nation state first, some people put their nation first, some people put their allegiances to blood and soil first, right? Whatever constitutes your physiology and your hero system, right, is going to differ, and you're going to have a different experience of reality from other people, and that's the wonderful, mystifying, exciting nature of reality.
What we've seen over the last 6 months is a textbook case of the same political stupidity of the Jews that Kristol described. It's clear who's in charge of the Republican Party. The nationalists are in charge, and they may be in charge for a generation or more. Given this fact, what would Jews and Zionist Christians be doing right now if they were thinking politically and willing to fight anti-Semitism using political tools? In short, what would Mordecai and Esther do?
So Jews tend to vote for the left in America because most American Jews are from Eastern Europe. For hundreds of years, their ancestors lived with a great deal of mutual loathing with the non-Jews. By contrast, those Americans, Jewish Americans whose ancestors come from Western Europe, right, they have ancestors who overall tend to have a great deal of respect for the non-Jews. So American Jews who hail from Western Europe tend to be quite moderate in their choices. Orthodox Jews overwhelmingly vote conservative, vote for Republicans, vote for people like Donald Trump. The secular Jews overwhelmingly vote for the left, just as the most intensely Christian members of the United States citizenry overwhelmingly vote Republican, and the more left-wing and liberal and easygoing and not so intensely Christian Christians tend to vote for the left. So Jews in America have tended to side with the liberal universalist outlook, right? They are reliable members of the professional managerial class. They are reliable members of all sorts of professional, political, and social coalitions that are not primarily Jewish. So they have depended and relied on the stability of the American legal system and the melting pot social contract. Now, then there is the Jewish expression in Israel. That's tribal. That's an alliance based on particularism. It's a closed-loop system. The state exists specifically to protect and promote the Jewish people as a collective. So you have all these colliding incentives. Israeli Jews tend to be tribalist and particularist. American Jews tend to be liberal and globalist. So to maintain their status within globalist liberal American circles, many American Jews feel pressure to distance themselves from the tribalist, nationalist Israeli nation state and policies. So a majority of American Jews still identify as Zionists, but more than half don't have much confidence in Israeli leadership. Now, there are Jews who identify primarily as American nationalists, and they may see themselves as part of some kind of civilizational alliance, which is what Yoram Hazony pushes. They don't see that Jewish identity and American nationalism are in conflict. They say, we share a common concern with the survival of the West, and we believe in this grand Jewish-Christian alliance rooted in shared biblical values, that the American experiment is a biblical balancing act. It's modeled after the covenant at Mount Sinai. The United States is not just a residence, it's a covenantal twin to Israel, and nationalism is a defense against our shared three main enemies, Islam, wokeism, and global neoliberalism. So for many Jewish American nationalists, being an American nationalist protects everything that they hold sacred, and it's a way to join with allies to fight the threat from Islam, from wokeism, and from global neoliberalism. So for these American nationalists who are also Jewish, they see the enemy not as the Gentile majority, not as American nationalists, but the Marxists, the globalists, the Muslim radicals, right? And so many American nationalists who are Jewish have built a high-status alliance within the nationalist wing of the Republican Party. Now, there are some Jews who feel increasingly nervous the more intense the Gentiles grow in, say, their Christian identity or in their American identity, as opposed to just being liberal and globalist in outlook. So when people develop increasingly intense particularist and in-group identities, that then serves as a shock and awe and is kind of scary for people with that globalist, liberal, everyone's individualist perspective. And there are plenty of American nationalists, such as Dave Rubin, who think that Israel's success as a nationalist state is a great blueprint for America. Maybe we should learn from Israel's nationalism and follow this nationalist path and reject the universalist, globalist ideologies that eat away at national identity. And these American nationalist Jews will face intense criticism from the liberal globalist Jews, who see nationalism as an inherent threat to minorities such as themselves. Then the nationalist Jews will say, look, the liberal hub has already betrayed us. They've made peace with the anti-Zionists and the left who hate us. So either you join the dominant American nationalist coalition that respects your civilization, or you remain a homeless liberal in a coalition that is increasingly hostile to Jews and Jewish nationalism. So Jewish nationalism creates tension for Gentiles, just as Gentile nationalism creates challenges and tensions for Jews, because all forms of nationalism change the universalist, globalist, individualist outlook that is the dominant outlook among the elites, the most educated, the highest IQ. And it's this globalist, universalist, individualist social contract that developed Western nations use to integrate their Jewish minorities and try to integrate other minorities. So when Jews become increasingly particularist and nationalist and Zionist, all right, this can be quite discomforting to non-Jews, right? Initially, the European nations offered Jews a specific trade, right? You get legal equality in our nation state. In exchange, you no longer primarily identify as Jewish, right? The motto is everything to Jews as individuals, nothing to Jews as a nation. Zionism rejects this ideal. Zionism says, look, Jews are a distinct nation with a distinct culture, a distinct right to their own land. The assimilation project has failed, right? The Gentiles are not going to be reliably always on our side. We have to form our own path through life. Now, from the perspective then of non-Jews, this growing Jewish nationalism bespeaks of a dual loyalty. Are our fellow Jewish citizens, are they primarily loyal to fellow Jews, to the Jewish state, or to the state that is on their passport? So when American or British or French or German Jews advocate for the Jewish state, right, Gentile nationalists might feel, oh my God, this is a fifth column, right? This is a group of people who are not in our in-group. So this isn't just about abstract concerns regarding anti-Semitism. This is about the mechanics of coalition, right? We naturally incline to in-group versus out-group, friend-enemy distinctions. And so if you have a group in your nation state who is primarily concerned and whose primary loyalty is to a foreign power, that will be discomforting to the nationalist, right? No nationalist wants to have people whose primary loyalty is to a foreign power.
First, they'd be doing everything they can to understand how nationalist Republicans think, what they care about, what's important to them. Second, they'd be looking for ways in which Jewish interests can be the basis for common ground with nationalist Republicans. Third, they'd be looking for ways to build bridges and friendships and rock-solid mutually beneficial alliances with nationalist Republicans. But that simply is not what's been happening. Mostly what Jews and Zionist Christians have been doing for the past 6 months is sitting outside the nationalist camp, looking in from a distance through the distorting medium of tendentious leaks and conspiracy theories, which certain liberal publications regularly publish with the aim of hurting the Republican Party as much as they can. It's absurd, but a lot of Jewish Republicans and Israeli Likudniks buy into this rubbish. Why? Because it's a lot easier to believe whatever you read in Jewish Insider, allowing yourself to become a tool in the hands of the left, than it is to do the difficult political work of opening doors and building bridges to the American nationalist camp.
And the chat says, you forgot about the Ten Commandments. So how did I forget about the Ten Commandments? Where did the Ten Commandments play into this discussion of dueling nationalisms? Right. So think about conversations. Conversations tend to be status exchanges. If I get into a conversation with you, I am either, in all likelihood, rising in status or dropping in status. If I am rising in status, you'll notice that I'm not bobbing my head around. People who are high status don't give away their necks. People who are high status or in an increasing status trajectory, they speak smoothly. They speak calmly. They are less reactive. They are not trying to placate. Right? They are smooth and calm. Now, if you get into a conversation and the topic turns to something that is embarrassing or painful, and you may very well find yourself losing status. So let's say your friend just got a great new job and you just got fired from your job. Right? You probably will be quite uncomfortable in that conversation, because as it goes on, you'll notice your friend who's got the great new job is rising in status. You're falling in status. You just got fired. It's embarrassing. It's humiliating. You don't want to talk about it, but your friend says, "Oh, I'm your friend. I want to reach out to you. I'm so sad that you lost your job. That must be really tough." And as they're expressing your concern, you just experience yourself dropping lower and lower in status. Or you call your friend and you say, "Oh, I've got this great new insight into how AI works." And then your friend one-ups you and shows that he knows the topic even better than you do. Right? You'll experience yourself dropping in status, your friend rising in status. Or you call your friend and you say, "Oh, I really like Rochelle," but your friend just nailed Rochelle last night. Right? You're going to experience yourself dropping in status, your friend rising in status. So we go through life, and we're either rising in status, staying the same, or dropping. We get into a conversation, we're either rising in status or we're dropping in status. So pretty much every conversation will contain a considerable amount of status transaction. And when you rise in status, when you rise in pride, when you feel your power and influence over other people, you will feel good, right? Our sense of pride is pretty much proportionate to how much we contribute and how much we can affect other people. On the other hand, when we recognize how irrelevant we are to other people, how embarrassing we are to other people, how association with us is stigmatized or it reduces other people's status, then we feel worse and worse, and we will tend to withdraw. And then as we withdraw, as we isolate, we will lose our ability to navigate social cues. We will become increasingly maladapted to life. We will become increasingly weird. We will miss out on all sorts of social, cultural, religious, and economic opportunities. And so other people will excel us. Their status will go up. Our status will go down. People who are rising in status don't want to spend time with people who are dropping in status. So there you go. Now, many non-Jews who even like Jews will have concerns about some types of Jewish nationalism, will have concerns about Zionism, because sometimes the interests of Zionism will be in conflict with their own national alliances. Zionists, right, want to defend the Jewish state, and then the Jewish state goes to war, and then that puts strain on various Gentile nationalisms. That which is in Zionist favor or in Israel's favor is not necessarily in the favor of the American nationalist, the British nationalist, the Jordanian nationalist. So Zionism claimed that it would normalize Jews. It would make them a nation like all other nations. But then for non-Jews, this was often seen as a paradox. They had seen Jews for centuries as a distinct religious cosmopolitan minority. Now you see Jews adopting blood and soil language of European nationalism. It may be jarring. For many non-Jews, Jewish nationalism was just too successful. They created this highly disciplined, technologically advanced, militarily capable state. We have a new Jewish power center that now Gentile coalitions have to negotiate with as an equal rather than simply manage Jews as a minority. So for many non-Jews, they had to deal with a shifted relationship from one of toleration, which provided high status for the Gentile, low status for the Jew, to a relationship of competition. We now have rival nationalist hubs, which causes friction and conflict. So many Christians adopted Zionism. They became Christian Zionists. They saw Jewish nationalism not as a threat, but as a theological alignment. They formed a triple alliance between Jewish Zionists, Christian Zionists, and conservative nationalists. And so you now had a new coalition that would fracture the Gentile majority, right? Secular and liberal Gentiles would resent this alliance. Why are all these weird biblical Christian Zionist priorities being brought into our national policy? And nationalist Gentiles who don't share these religious views, who don't share Christian Zionism, who are not pro-Zionist, they see all this Jewish nationalism as a distraction from their America First nationalism or British First goals. So Gentile nationalisms create challenges and threats and opportunities and tension for Jews. Jewish nationalism creates all the same thing for Gentiles. Nationalism becomes a litmus test. People have to choose between competing alliance hubs. And fundamental political question is the friend-enemy distinction. Who's my friend? Who's my ally? Who's my enemy? And we see this in 2026 fracturing both the political left and the political right, but for different reasons. So on the left, there's a general outlook of universalism. And now we've got the rise of Jewish particularism that is going to war with the states around it. And so most elite institutions in the developed nations, the universities, the NGOs, the elite media are organized around the idea that tribalism is primitive, nationalism is primitive and dangerous and genocidal, ethnic nationalism is primitive, it's an oppressive force, and high moral status is granted to those who align with universal human rights and decolonization narratives. And Zionism is a direct challenge to this. Zionism says a specific people has specific claims to a specific piece of land, has loyalties of blood and soil, and will fight to protect specific people. So supporting Israel then will feel like a betrayal of your coalition's core values. This is why you see such vitriol on American university campuses, because American university campuses tend to be the least nationalist part of the United States. Zionism is nationalism. Virtually no nationalism has a good name on a university campus, whether it's in Australia or England or in the United States of America. So to be a good progressive, a good liberal, right, to be a member of the ruling elite with the highest education, right, you must now cast Zionism as just another exclusionary ideology, another primitive, knuckle-dragging, tribal, backward, medieval outlook that, for the good of humanity, we should overcome.
What would you find if you actually invested the time and effort and opened those doors? Well, mostly you'd discover that nationalist Republicans are not anti-Semites, that they're strongly committed to having Jews in their coalition, that they'd like to have closer relations with the Jewish community, that many of them see Israel as an inspiration and wish America were more like Israel. In short, you discover that most of them are potential friends and allies. And you discover that nearly all of them are mystified as to why so many Jews and Zionist Christians invest so much time and energy attacking them instead of trying to build strong friendships with them. At this point, we know that much of what was done in the name of fighting anti-Semitism in America in the last 50 years was a complete failure.
Yes, fighting anti-Semitism, particularly as a career, as a racket, right, is bogus and gay. So on the right, the tension is different. We have a struggle between civilizational nationalists and isolationist nationalists. So the civilizational nationalists, the nationalist wing of the GOP, the national conservatives, the Yoram Hazony nationalists, see Israel as a vital ally in a shared struggle against radical Islam and globalism and globo-homo. Right? They view the Jewish state as a blueprint for a healthy border-defending nation. Now, there are isolationist populists, such as Tucker Carlson and company, who see Zionism as a foreign entanglement. Right? And their America First logic is inward-looking. To them, any alliance that requires billions in aid or risks military involvement for Israel's security is a hidden alliance that subverts the primary national interest. It is not a ridiculous perspective. And we see sharp new tensions within Christianity. We have all these Christian organizations issuing statements against Christian Zionism as a damaging ideology. So we have a civil war growing among Christians. You got traditionalists, Catholics, and Orthodox. They view Jewish nationalism, Jewish sovereignty as a threat to Christian presence in the Middle East and a violation of their supersessionist theology. Then you have Christian evangelicals, the Protestant Zionists, who view the restoration of Israel as a non-negotiable biblical truth. So for the Gentile observer, right, Zionism is not just some distant foreign policy issue. It is a wedge. It forces them to decide between friend and enemy. Is there a primary alliance with global decolonization movements or a specific theological tradition or a nationalist civilizational front? The middle ground is disappearing, and the old alliances are being torn up, and everything's up for grabs.
None of it prevented the takeover of the Democratic Party by anti-Jewish movements. None of it appears to be helping in the present battle over the place of Jews in the Republican Party either. But the good news is that the future relationship between nationalist Republicans and Jews hasn't been decided yet, which means we're looking at a truly historic opportunity.
Yes, history has not been written yet.
Oh, and he's won 2 Guinness World Records for being the youngest person to master 2 very difficult snooker shots.
This is so Manchester.
Fun. Yes, it's very Manchester. But look at that.
And your dad hangs out at the pub all day.
Yeah.
All right, well, Jessica generously offered to let me go next. So Saturday in America, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Don't miss it. My exclusive interview with Kash Patel. Of course, you know him, FBI director. So he joins me Saturday, 10 a.m. Join that. And then, by the way, Tampa won't be tuning in, sadly, my hometown, because guess what? It is Gasparilla. This is amazing. It's like the Vikings, right? Yeah. Except we go out with our pirate ships. Everyone dresses like pirates. My sister's going to be there, my dad, my mom. It's an invasion, 4.5-mile parade, 100 floats. They usually arrest the mayor, so we'll see if that Jessica.
Okay, very cute, industrious. This family in Austin, New York, turned an old mattress into a makeshift snow plow, dragging it along. But their dog Tucker had other plans. He hitched a ride and took a nap instead.
They should have put Tungus on the mattress.
With the dog.
All right, that's it for us. Have a great night.
Have fun at Gasparilla, Kayla. See ya. Good evening. I'm Brett Baer. President Trump's new funding accounts for American children get a major launch. The Justice Department raids the Fulton County, Georgia Elections Office for information concerning the voting in 2020. And Congress takes on ticket scalpers and surprise fees for live entertainment events. But first, breaking tonight, the fight over President Trump's immigration enforcement strategy could result in another partial government shutdown. Friday is the deadline for action on funding for Homeland Security, and while ICE is part of that, ICE has already largely been funded through 2029. That still means Democrats are digging in on this political issue. Senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich reports tonight live from the North Lawn. Good evening, Jackie.
Good evening, Brett. And it appears Minnesota Democrats are dug in, refusing to hand over criminal aliens in their jails to have federal officials leave as congressional Democrats withhold their funding votes trying to extract ICE reforms. Democrats appear close to forcing at least a partial government shutdown over efforts to rein in ICE.
Senate Democrats are united on a set of common sense and necessary policy goals.
Their demands: ending roving ICE patrols, establish a uniform code of conduct consistent with state and local law, including independent investigations into violations, and prohibit federal agents from wearing masks and require them to use body cameras. Schumer already trying to blame Republicans if agencies like TSA go unfunded once again.
If funding lapses, it's all because of Leader Thune. It's on his back. He could easily fund 96% of the budget by simply putting the 5 bills on the floor.
President Trump also expressing dismay. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey rejected his offer to reduce the federal footprint in exchange for cooperation on criminal illegal aliens, posting that Frey is playing with fire.
There are 1,360 criminal illegal aliens in Minnesota's jails. What we want is the commitment that they are going to honor those detainers and turn them over to ICE, or at least give us a notification before they're released.
DHS releasing a roundup of the worst arrested yesterday in Operation Metro Surge. One man from Laos convicted of homicide. Another from Nicaragua charged for multiple sex crimes, including assault of a victim under 16. A third man from Vietnam had convictions for sex assault and homicide. Frey responded to President Trump, "The job of our police is to keep people safe, not enforce Fed immigration laws. I want them preventing homicides, not hunting down a working dad who contributes to Minneapolis and is from Ecuador." To which the White House said, "We are just asking you to honor ICE detainers and let them know when when criminal illegals are in your jail so they can safely pick them up and deport.
The chat says, stop making Tucker more relevant. You're amplifying his argument. I'm nobody. I have 12 people watching right now on YouTube. I am streaming live across the Rumble platform where I have 3 live viewers. I am streaming live across X where I have a handful of viewers. I'm streaming live on Kick.com where I have 1 or 2 viewers. I am streaming live on Odyssey where I have 1 viewer. So probably collectively I have about 20, 25 live viewers right now. I am irrelevant. LOL, nothing matters. I don't have any power or influence. When I die, 12 people will be sad. Maybe 24 people will be sad. Maybe in total 300 people will notice when that sad day comes. But I'm irrelevant, bro, and I know it, and it's okay. LOL, nothing matters. So, do you remember when it was revealed that Roger Ailes, the chair of Fox News Channel, confirmed that he had sent a note to the White House with, hold on, I hope you're sitting down for this, for policy suggestions, right? You're not supposed to do this as a journalist. And journalists were absolutely outraged. Why? Right? Because we have identities, group identities, and this destroyed the illusion that journalists and the mainstream media were separate from the other institutions, that journalists were here to check power. Journalists are here much more to advance the interests of their particular alliance more than they are to check power. So this Roger Ailes memo just stripped away the whole performative layer of journalists, that they're independent. They're just here to hold power accountable. Right? It stripped away the respectability performance. So this is how it's supposed to work. An interested actor, such as a politician or a bureaucrat, he leaks a finding to a preferred reporter. The reporter then publishes it as an exclusive. Then the politician stands behind a podium and cites the independent reporting to justify his policy. Right? This is how the alliance is supposed to work. And then Roger Ailes goes and he does what you're not supposed to do. He says the quiet part out loud. He was explicit with his advice. He wrote it down. Don't write it down. There are all sorts of things you should never write down. If you do not want something read out loud in a courtroom or on national TV or flashed across a billboard at a packed Dodger Stadium, then don't write it down. Don't put it in text. Don't put it in an email. Right? If you have negative things to say about a coworker or a client, right, don't write it down. Don't put it in a chat. Don't put it in a text. Don't put it in an email. So this distance between the journalist and the institutions that he covers is largely a social fiction, but it's a necessary one for this particular alliance to maintain its moral authority, its status. So if the public sees how the sausage is being made, right, sees the game where the politician leaks to the journalist publishes the leak, and then the politician cites the independent validation of his policy by the journalist, and the whole game is ruined, right? Right? Roger Ailes turned a wink and nod arrangement into a formal coordination, which reduces the status. It destroys the performance, right? You're not supposed to do this. This is a lack of discretion. And the elite media reacted harshly because it threatened their independent expert status. They're not independent experts, right? If they are not independent pursuers of truth, but they're just a part of the professional managerial class that overwhelmingly votes for the Democrats and overwhelmingly tends to have a left of center political agenda, then their status and their standing and their income and their business model all become threatened. Right now, they become more vulnerable to populist attacks that want to delegitimize the entire gatekeeping professional managerial class. And so the outrage from journalists and their institutions was coalition defense. They had to signal Roger Ailes is an outlier. He's not really one of us, because they had to keep performing this distance between themselves and their subjects. Right? So if the independent news media is exposed as total fiction, right, if the game of leaks and citations stops working as a tool of social control, well, then you have a glitch in the matrix. Right? These hidden alliances have become visible. It's like the the hidden machinations of science was revealed during COVID. You're not supposed to have different scientists publicly disagreeing with each other. You need to convince the public that there is science. Science equals truth. Science is objective. Science is disinterested. Science doesn't have a particularist agenda. It doesn't have a professional, managerial, social class agenda, right? It's just science. It's truth. Then along comes COVID, and scientists are arguing with each other, which demystified the whole scientists as disinterested experts who are only pursuing truth agenda. And that reduces the status of science. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher, and as soon as I wrote a comment on a blog criticizing one particular approach to the Alexander Technique, one particular school in the Alexander Technique, I could no longer be a member of the leading elite Alexander Technique association, right? Doctors, lawyers, every profession has rules against publicly criticizing each other, because when doctors publicly criticize other doctors, it usually reduces the status of doctors. And doctors and lawyers in particular are insecure in their status because there's no strong correlation between excellence and results. So with engineers, there's this very strong, almost one-to-one correlation between excellence and results. Does the plane fly? Does the building stand? Right? Does the bridge operate as it should? Right, you know when engineers are being excellent, but you could have the most excellent doctor in the world, and they may not be able to save the life of the patient. You might have the most excellent lawyer in the world, and they may not be able to win the case of the client. So when your standing relies on public goodwill and there's no clear one-to-one correlation between your excellence and the result, then you have to talk about your great big ethical standards and your values and how you're committed to this extensive series of ethical standards, that you put the client first and your first obligation is to do no harm, et cetera, et cetera. You need to build up this public relations policy to try to preserve as much status for your profession as possible and to keep out anyone who wants to impinge on your status. So think about the lead up to the 2003 Iraq War. Or the distance between the elite news media and the state was not just thin, it was non-existent. You had this entire alliance hub functioning with total discipline, total discretion, because they shared a goal, regime change in Iraq, and it superseded the truth, superseded any individual's impulse for skepticism. So the New York Times would report all these bogus leaks that they got from the intelligence, military, political, industrial complex. They would talk about aluminum tubes, right, presenting some major atomic capability, weapons of mass destruction that the Saddam Hussein regime had. You'd get all these leaks of selective intelligence reports about Iran's nuclear capabilities. The story will run on the front page. Then the same morning, the National Security Advisor and the Vice President will appear on the most elite Sunday talk shows, and they'll point to these front page stories as proof of the gathering threat in Iraq. Right? This is the circular intelligence model. Right? The politician, the bureaucrat, the intelligence agency leaks to the reporter, who then reports the leak, and then the political actor then cites this independent reporting. So dissent was not considered an option, right? You didn't just have differences of opinion. Any dissent from this narrative that we had to go to a war with Iraq because Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, any dissent from that was a threat to the alliance, right? You question the WMD narrative, right? You get marginalized, you'll be denied access, and you'll be marginalized by your employer and by your peers. To keep your status when the elite ruling alliance, you had to signal your reliability on the war coalition, how necessary it was to go into Iraq. Right? If you are skeptical of the claims of the Bush administration, you are soft on terror, bro. You're unpatriotic. You had to be excluded from respectable discourse. Right? The claims fall apart. And there's not some kind of structural overhaul of how the game works. Instead, the alliance performs this ritualized mea culpa. They talk about individual errors. They don't talk about how the system works. They don't talk about how the sausage is made. They don't talk about the nature of the incentive structure that created this. So the institutions get to keep their roles as high-status gatekeepers without admitting that the independent observer role that they claim for themselves is a lie. Right? The system did not fail in 2003. It worked exactly as the incentives of the alliance would predict. That journalists gain status by signaling their reliability to their alliance, and they avoid stories that will damage their alliance. And coverage shifts from persuasion to containment when the threat such as populism, arises. Language becomes moral and categorical. Nuance drops because nuance weakens the alliance. And all those pundits who supported the 2003 invasion, all those experts, military experts, intelligence experts, political experts, geopolitical experts, international relations experts, nuclear experts, WMD experts, human rights experts, all those big minds, all those high-status people promoting the invasion and occupation of Iraq, did they pay any career price for that? No, none, absolutely not. Why? Because they didn't violate alliance norms, right? As long as you're good with the group, you can get away with murder, right? They were honored. The 2003 invasion of Iraq was an elite consensus project, right? Between politicians, the national security bureaucracy, the elite media, the think tanks, the donors, the NGOs, you had a collective failure. And in this type of situation, you don't get individual punishment. Punishment is for the defectors. It's not for the loyalists who are wrong together. It doesn't really matter to your standing in the alliance if you're wrong, even if you're disastrously wrong. What matters is that you are a person who can be counted on to be loyal to the alignment, to the alliance. So the pundits all made the correct alliance move at the time. They all amplified the preferred narrative that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, right? And American primacy, American credibility, American resolve, American moral clarity, right? All had to be preserved and strengthened and praised, right? This showed that you're a good, loyal member of the alliance. And once you pass that loyalty test, it doesn't really matter if you were saying things that weren't true and were disastrous. You were one of us when it mattered. And so responsibility was diffused. The war was sold as intelligence failure. It was a breakdown in the bureaucracy. It wasn't executed right. It was bad luck. And all this diffusion protects the individual reputations of the people who promoted this disastrous war and occupation. So no single expert could be isolated as uniquely culpable, right? Alliance systems punish dissenters and heretics. They don't punish people who say things that are not true. They don't punish mistakes, right? And the pundits could say, hey, I wasn't the decision maker. I was just interpreting, explaining, amplifying. So intermediaries don't get punished for bad outcomes. They were just interpreters in sync with the power structure. So being wrong in service of power is far safer than being right against it. The dominant individuals who opposed the 2003 invasion paid a huge price. They weren't rewarded for being right. And the big minds, the high-status people promoting this disastrous war, they didn't pay a price. They just went from power to power because they were in sync with power, right? Being wrong in service of power is a much savvier career path than being right against power. And there was no strong rival elite coalition that could impose sanctions on all these people who were disastrously wrong, right? The war discredited policy, but it didn't discredit personnel, right? The same people still staff the institutions. So Donald Trump comes along, or Barack Obama comes along, and they can't find people to staff their national security institutions who were opposed to the 2003 Iraq invasion because there were virtually none, right? The same people booking TV shows, editing magazines, running foundations, all right? Same people who supported the 2003 Iraq invasion. And so they all got to say, oh, I was wrong. They got to perform calibrated regret. They were serious. They said, oh, I'm so sorry. And they performed the proper rituals, and they got to continue their membership in the power structure. Right? You just have to perform the ritual, stay aligned with power, and your life will be easier than if you're right and against power.
The opportunity to build bridges and a potentially solid alliance with the dominant nationalist camp in the Republican Party, which could stand for a generation or more. Finding common ground with nationalist Republicans is the most important thing we could be doing to actually fight anti-Semitism in America. And if we do that well, then maybe we have a shot at pushing anti-Semitism back into the embarrassing irrelevance that it so richly deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hazony. And the chat says, 40, if you start your chats with something less confrontational, something more engaging, like how sorry you are for the great suffering of the innocent, you will get more clicks. I don't care about clicks, bro. I am a truth optimizer. I'm not a click optimizer. I'm not seeking to play the game to get more clicks and to get more views and to tell people what they want to hear, right? The people who follow this show, this small, tiny group of people, this band of brothers, right? I have gathered together a tiny coalition of truth optimizers, right? I am not here to tell people, oh, your prejudice is the right way, that we are the righteous ones and people opposed to us are evil, that there is a group that is aligned with God and righteousness, and we are that righteous group, and anyone who disagrees with us is perfidious, right? That's not how this show rolls. This show is a truth optimizing show. It's not a click optimizing show. I'm not here to go viral. I'm here to tell the truth to the best of my abilities, whether or not it is congenial to your sensibilities.
Yeah. Brown shirt, brown nose, I guess is the answer for him. I have one other person that I have to ask you about that you wrote a profile about recently, because they're relevant to what's happening out there right now, which is Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. She's been kind of a favorite of the pod. She's very charming. I mean that in a sincere way, unlike the sarcastic way I meant it before. I find her charming. I like that she is resistant to, you know, kind of the Ivy League lib hive mind on various things. And I think that's a valuable instinct for Democrats if they want to start winning over people who, you know, don't have those sensibilities again. But man, her response this week to ICE has been pretty alarming. And she voted to continue funding DHS and then gave a statement yesterday or 2 days ago about how the Democratic politicians egging on the protesters share some responsibility here. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight on that. I know that distancing herself from Biden on immigration was kind of part of her origin story. So maybe she just is in lockstep on that, or if you have any other thoughts. I think
that maybe has more to do with law enforcement and her support of law enforcement, especially in her district, and the sentiment among, you know, either members of law enforcement or family members or people close to law enforcement. I think there's a real concern about, I mean, even though people are upset, obviously, with ICE's tactics, I think the response isn't exactly the same as liberals' response, especially when it comes to things like masking and doxing, which I think, you know, most Democrats, I think a lot of people think it's ridiculous that people are wearing masks. I think
if they don't wear masks, they're going to get doxxed. So I like Britt Hume. Let's see what he has to say.
Good evening. Looking at these polls, first on that issue we just heard about, ICE efforts to deport illegal immigrants. If we ask folks out there, too aggressive, 59%, not aggressive enough, 17%, about right, 24%. That tracks with other polls that we've seen in recent days surrounding a lot of this video that obviously has come out, and there's all kinds of people weighing in on all sides.
Yeah, Brett, I think that's right. It does track with the other polls. And it suggests that while the administration is within its limits, its legal limits in this immigration crackdown and the dragnet that's going on, particularly out in Minnesota, it has hit its political limits. And the Republic's response to what it is seeing on its TV screens and reading about in publications and so forth suggests that people, you know, they want the border closed, they want criminal illegals rounded up, but they see these scenes in the street, particularly the two killings in Minnesota, and they see, you know, people who seem otherwise innocent, although they may be here illegally, rounded up. They don't like that. We have a compassionate people, and even illegal immigrants are not beyond the scope of that compassion. And I think the administration is being seen as having gone too far on this, and the polls certainly suggest that.
Yeah, some of the criticism has been sanctuary states, sanctuary cities. President Trump went to Truth Social this morning saying, surprisingly, Mayor Jacob Frey just stated that Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws. This is after having had a very good conversation with him. Could somebody in his inner sanctum please explain that this statement is a very serious violation of the law and that he is playing with fire? To which the mayor responded, the job of our police is to keep people safe, not to enforce federal immigration laws. I want them preventing homicide homicides, not hunting down a working dad who contributes to MPLS and is from Ecuador. He says it's similar policy to your guy Rudy in New York City. If you look at our polls, it's an even split, Brett, about requiring local governments to cooperate with ICE, but there is some thought out there about how states and localities deal with this.
Yeah, I think that's right. Brett, I think these two people, the president and the mayor, are kind of talking past each other, because the Mayor Fry and his police department are not being asked to enforce federal immigration law. That's what those ICE agents and Border Patrol agents are doing. That's their job. It is not, however, I think, unreasonable to ask that the local police prevent those agents who are enforcing the law from being harassed, intimidated, blocked, and interfered with as they're doing that. And Fry hasn't ever quite said he wouldn't do that. Now, this question of the release of the prisoners from the jails is another matter. He seems unwilling to do that. But I wonder if while Tom Homan's out there, he may not be able to work that out. We'll have to see. But the administration is looking for a way out of the controversy here, and it may be that the mayor and the governor out there will see that that's what they want to do too.
Yeah, one quick one on the U.S. economy. We hear from the administration about the growth and the potential growth in Q1, Q2, and what they see on the horizon. We asked, are you better off financially than a year ago? Better 24%, worse 39%, same 36%. It is what we've talked about numerous times about feeling where the economy is and what that means for people at home.
Yeah, as we look ahead to the midterms, Brett, people are going to be judging this election and the president's continuing standing on the basis of how well they feel the economy is going. There are signs, and some experts say that we're going to have a booming economy this coming year or this rest of this year, and certainly the administration certainly needs that because while the stock market is high and employment is relatively high, people do not feel good about this economy. This poll suggests that, and they haven't for some time, and it's not so far getting any better for them, which would be very dangerous for the Republicans in the midterm elections.
Yeah, which is why we're seeing the president in Iowa and probably...
Okay, Robert Walters in the chat. He says the Jewish tribe turned its back on the Logos. So what does that mean? They didn't buy into the Greek Hellenic narrative about how God came to earth, and if you just participate in some kind of ritual of cannibalism by eating his flesh and drinking his blood, then you live forever. Yes, if that's what it means to turn its back on the Logos, then count me guilty. How can the Jewish tribe survive inside of Gentile nations when they have only hatred of them? Well, given that overwhelmingly most Jews in America marry non-Jews, I don't find that argument very persuasive, right? If Jews just have so much hatred of Gentiles, why do they prefer to marry Gentiles rather than marry Jews? Robert says, I have contentment. I love contentment and wealth. Money is worthless. Greed is a vice. Subversion is weakness. Okay, is that some kind of catechism that I'm not really up on? So, you make a career in punditry, in podcasts, in live streams, not on the basis of telling the truth, not on the basis of accuracy, not on the basis of profundity or clarity or wisdom, right? You build a career by serving your coalition. And all those pundits who are wrong on Iraq and wrong on many other things, wrong on free trade, wrong on invade the world, invite the world, right? They all stayed in good standing with the ruling coalition because they failed together on cue without defecting, right? They served the power structure, and so they just went on from strength to strength.
Among some people in law enforcement who are not, people who are doing this stuff with ICE in Minnesota, there's more of a defense of masking and a concern about being doxxed. And I think she's trying to give some voice to that. That's my sense, at least. I don't think it has as much to do with immigration as much as it has to do with law enforcement.
Interesting. All right. Now to Tucker. Tucker McNear Swanson Carlson, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's McNear, not McNair, but yeah,
McNear.
Yeah, I believe.
Yeah, man of the people. Heir to a what kind of fortune did they have?
Well, it was land. It was he was a rancher. His great grandfather. Also, Nellie Bowles' great grandfather.
So Tucker is a member of the ruling elite who defected to the side of the populace. Now, remember 2004, Jon Stewart goes on Tucker Carlson's Crossfire show, and things did not proceed as expected.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're talking to Jon Stewart, who was just lecturing us on our moral inferiority. John, you're bumming us out. Tell us, what do you think of the Bill O'Reilly vibrator story?
No. I'm sorry? I don't. I'm here to confront you because we need help from the media, and they're hurting us. I made a special effort to come on the show today because I have mentioned this show as being bad. Mm-hmm. It's not so much that it's bad as it's hurting America. So I wanted to come here today and say... Wait. Here's just what I wanted to tell you guys. Yeah. Stop. Stop hurting America. Okay. I watch your show every day, and it kills me.
I can tell you love it.
It's so painful to watch. Your partisan, what do you call it, hacks.
Wait, John,
you have a responsibility to the public discourse. And you fail
need to get a job at a
miserably.
I think you're a good comedian. I think your lectures are boring.
You're on CNN. The show that leads into me is puppets making crank phone calls. What is wrong with you? It's someone who watches your show and cannot take it anymore. I just can't.
You need to get a job at a
miserably.
School, I think.
You need to go to one. Now, this is theater. I mean, it's obvious. How old are you?
35.
And you wear a bow tie.
Yeah, I do.
Not at all.
I do think you're more fun on your show. Just my opinion.
But
Jon Stewart goes one-on-one with his face.
Okay, that's hilarious. All right, let's look at the chat. Robert says, when you turn your back on logic, who's turned their back on logic? You can only attack the character, not the argument. Well, it depends on the situation. Sometimes it's simply more effective to attack the character and not the argument. And sometimes it's more effective to attack the argument and not the character. It's not like there's just, one universal principle for how you should debate. This is why Luke has repeatedly attacked my character and not my argument. Yes, that's why I'm just repeatedly attacking you, bro. Just like every single show, hour after hour, all I'm doing is attacking Robert. One thing I'm curious about, if Luke and his friends think they want any of the arguments, it's fascinating to think that you believe you've got these incredibly powerful arguments. Interesting. Because I think I've got these incredibly powerful arguments. So one of us is wrong. One of us is disconnected from reality. So why is this Jon Stewart 2004 Crossfire appearance? Why was it just an explosive moment in journalism? Because it exposed a deep cohesion crisis in the elite media alliance, right? It revealed a breakdown in the alliance's signals. So the Crossfire hosts, Tucker Carlson, Paul Begala, they represented the old media coalition that believed its job was to manage partisan conflict within partisan bounds. They thought that being even-handed, that signaled stability. So Jon Stewart walks in and he disrupts these signals. He treats their format not as weak, but as complicit in reducing serious journalism to theater. So he threatens the alliance's self-image. So his critique was alliance exposure. It wasn't partisan attack. He didn't argue that Crossfire was biased. He argued that argument on the show was harmful to our democratic discourse, that it was an attack. He made an attack on the legitimacy of CNN and the show and the media coalition's role, the alliance, not just one show's guests. So this was a far deeper attack than just disagreeing with a pundit, because he was undermining the authority that this ruling elite coalition relied on to manage public perception. So to Jon Stewart, the format was the enemy, not Tucker and not Paul Begala. So Crossfire was a stylized theatrical conflict that presented itself as serious debate. So Stewart comes along and says the show hurts America. So he reframes the entire genre of combative punditry as alliance malpractice. So he attacks the format that the elites used to mediate political conflict. So he attacked the infrastructure of the ruling elite media coalition. And this was a time when the ruling elite media coalition was highly insecure. This is 2004. All these doubts had crept in. So you hear about young, earnest Christians who get an attack of the doubts about their Christian faith when they go to uni. Well, now Iraq and the invasion and occupation have turned into a mess. Trust in American institutions is dropping. The mainstream media was accused of facilitating a stupid, pointless, disastrous invasion and occupation of war. The media is credibly accused of groupthink. And Stewart gives voice to this insecurity. So an elite coalition that is shaky has to now deal with a charismatic critic from outside the coalition, and he has disproportionate impact. So Stewart is not acting like a normal partisan. He's not a clean supporter of one side. His criticism is cross-coalitional, right? So for all those establishment insiders who just filter information through a partisan lens, his message can now infiltrate both the left and the right elites because he is not making a critique based on left or right. So his message goes viral because he threatens the coalition center, the coalition's claims, the coalition's status. And he confirmed private doubts publicly. So many people in newsrooms and in journalism departments at elite universities doubted the value of these partisan theatrical shouting matches, but they didn't dare say so publicly. Now, Jon Stewart comes along and he says publicly what many people are privately thinking. He externalizes a sentiment that was already latent inside the elite competition. Now, everyone recognizes that the emperor has no clothes, and this event becomes a turning point. The incentive structure changed. So for the next decade, the mainstream media stopped pushing, focusing, creating, producing, airing all these adversarial formats. These shows shifted in tone and in structure. The alliance adapted after this shocking event. So coalitions change when their leading actors recognize an internal threat, not just external competition. So this was not about Jon Stewart annoying Crossfire. It was a figure from outside the elite media alliance, publicly diagnosing a core mechanism of that alliance as corrosive, and this struck at the heart of how mainstream journalism legitimized its own power, and the elites felt it exposed a fault line they knew was there, but they had not yet voiced. So Jon Stewart comes along and he says that which a lot of people are thinking.
Oddly enough.
Really? They're cousins?
Yeah. By marriage, I guess.
Weiss's wife.
Yeah, by marriage. Yeah, but Henry Miller was like the largest landowner in the United States in the 19th century.
Am I just reading a poorly written script that was handed to me? No, bro. I am reading from a brilliant blog post that I developed with the help of Gemini and ChatGPT and my 59 years of living.
He basically owned a swath of land that went from like the Mexican border up to Oregon.
I want to start with Tucker origin story stuff, which is relevant here at the Bulwark, because as I was reading your book, there's something I didn't know, or maybe I'd known and forgotten, which is that he interviewed with Bill Kristol, Mondays with Bill Kristol at the Weekly Standard, hoping to get a job, and he got rejected. And it was only on the second interview that he made a good impression. And I feel like this is such a butterfly flapping its wings moment. If only Bill had stuck to his first instinct about Tucker, maybe we wouldn't be here right now.
He would have gone back to Arkansas.
Oh man, that poorly written script remark, bro, that stung. What was poorly written in my remarks? Now, I just made you a moderator because it was a substantive comment. Robert, I have to remove you as a moderator because I live in a Jewish community. I can't be anointing someone saying all these terrible things about Jews as a moderator of this elite channel where I have, 6 live viewers right now. I'm not going to let this enormous viewership go to my head. Remember Fred Barnes? I love Fred Barnes on the McLaughlin Group back in the 1980s. Evangelical Christian, reliable conservative. He finally retired as a regular columnist for the Washington Examiner in 2021 after, 5 decades in political journalism. So he was a pure institutional loyalist, right? He optimized for supporting his institutions, Christian institutions, conservative institutions. He wasn't a disruptor. He wasn't original, right? He attached himself early to the post-Goldwater, post-Reagan conservative governing class. He was not a populist. He wasn't insurgent. He was a respectable conservative member of the establishment who wanted access, legitimacy, and continuity. Right? He translated the thinking of insiders to fellow insiders. He had a priestly role, not a prophet role. He was less of a truth seeker than someone who was managing the conservative Christian political alliance. He was all about connecting donors, policy intellectuals, politicians, and journalists into a shared world view. He didn't break news. He took big rhetorical risks. He tried to lead audiences somewhere. He signaled reliability. He consistently defended Republicans even when they were wrong. Right? He operated with pure political coalition discipline. His whole job, the whole point of his work was to reassure Republican elites that they were right and that their coalition was right, and there was no need to defect. He was never the star at Fox News. He was safe. Right? Fox needed figures who could launder partisan commitments into calm institutional language. Fred Barnes could do that without embarrassment or drama. Right? He didn't generate audience volatility. He didn't create internal conflict. He didn't ride Trumpism up or down. He wasn't a resistance hero or a MAGA firebrand. He just aged quietly as his coalition lost cultural dominance. He didn't reinvent himself. He extracted the maximum value he could from his Christian conservative free market alliance. So he chose a high status but finite coalition. He served his coalition loyally. He was rewarded with longevity, access, respect. The coalition declined, so did his relevance. This is how institutional careers end. He's the model of a man who never betrayed his alliance, just did what his conservative Christian alliance expected him to do.
And, eventually would have gone into like corporate comms for Walmart or something. When the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, contracted, he would have had to do that. Yeah, it was, he came in sort of, he had good clips and, had some positive recs and just apparently blew that first interview. Kristol didn't remember a ton about how he blew it, but just that he blew it. He didn't have good stories, good story ideas. And then, he lucked out a guy who was kind of interning for, Bill Kristol and Bill Kristol's dad that summer. I guess I was writing a book about Kristol's dad, had been like a good friend of Tucker's and kind of went to bat for Tucker. And then Fred Barnes as well. His kids, their Sunday school teacher was Tucker's wife, Susie, and they kind of went to the bat for him. And he was given a second interview, and I think he did better on that one.
Great. Fred Barnes' fault. That's perfect. We don't have any Fred Barnes issues at the Bulwark. We can blame it on him. The other parts, and I kind of want to fast forward to the part that matters about Tucker, because I think what he's doing now is a little bit more important than his, it's interesting and fun fodder for people who want to read the book, his time with Rachel Maddow and stuff, but he's particularly relevant in the moment with his new pivot.
So one of my favorite academics is Stephen Park Turner. He is a philosopher of the social sciences. So he's an institutional outsider, right? But he's steadily built up epistemic authority rather than coalitional power. So he's a thought specialist. He's a truth seeker, right? He's not an alliance climber. His work sits at the intersection of sociology, philosophy, social theory, and the history of knowledge. He's not a pundit. He's not an agitator. He's a scholar of social practice and epistemology. So his professional identity is inside academia's elite epistemic coalition. So epistemic means how do we know what we know? He's not a lead figure in the mass media or partisan politics. So he patrols the internal norms of social science and philosophy. He's not about signaling to broad publics. So his name is known in intellectual academic circles, but not outside of them. So coalitions reward people who serve core institutional functions, and Stephen Turner does that. He's been at the University of South Florida since 1975. He publishes extensively in prestigious presses and journals. He's never tried to defect to a broader coalition. His alliance is the academic guild. So his work criticizes the legitimacy and claims of expertise and its role in politics. He talks about expert knowledge structures in liberal democracies. Who gets to define expertise, how it's a political choice. It's not some kind of neutral truth-finding process. So he aligns with coalitions worried about expertise, technocracy, and elite capture. He doesn't signal along partisan political lines. He doesn't trade in loyalty signals to political factions. Right? He doesn't try to cultivate a mass audience. He signals to other academics. So he's not widely publicly visible, but he is in high standing among his peers. So he is anchored in a tight epistemic guild where he has enormous status rather than broad cultural influence. So coalition value comes in many forms. You may have a Bill Kristol and a Tucker Carlson who chase public alliances. You may have a Seymour Hersh or a Mike Benz who chase attention coalitions. Stephen Turner built an expertise coalition anchored in scholarship and the optimization of truth. This is a different currency of alliance power. He's not famous, but he is influential within a specific, institutionally powerful network of scholars. He serves and masters a specific elite epistemic and academic alliance. He doesn't work on creating mass appeal or political positions. So he's carved a deep specialization and developed tremendous epistemic credibility. He doesn't play to broad audiences or partisan alliances. Stephen Park Turner, one of my favorite philosophers.
I was kind of interested particularly in the way you wrote about the CNN Crossfire era, where Tucker felt very, at least this is, I guess, what he claims, but you say he claims, like, he didn't like having to put on the partisan jersey as much as he did. And I do feel like that there's something about that moment and kind of like our media complex that like radicalized him a little bit away from his natural instinct of being more of like a kind of contrarian, heterodox type person. Talk about that era.
Well, I mean, I think his writing career, that he sort of made his bones as a contrarian, and I think and his kind of his social life in Washington, he was a contrarian. I think liberals in Washington enjoyed having him around at dinner parties and other things because, he was sort of this outrageous voice, right? And he would say something.
Yes, Tucker was embedded in the elite media complex. And he was a member in good standing until about 2011, 2012. I have some chickens you can wave over your head on my farm, Luke, so that my sins will be forgiven. It's funny how you make fun of Christians for believing in salvation. Well, if you believe in your religion, then every other religion in the world looks satanic. If you believe in Christianity, let's be honest, Judaism, Islam, other religions will look satanic to you. If you believe in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and other religions will look satanic. That's the nature of reality. So, two of my favorite writers, two of my favorite authors are Tom Wolfe and his successor, Michael Lewis, who wrote The Blind Side. I loved that book. I loved the NFL, and I loved the movie. So where is Michael Lewis in our story, right? He's someone who makes a very good living criticizing elites, but never threatens elites. He always keeps his work on the safe end of the spectrum. So early Michael Lewis exposed incompetence inside Wall Street traders. He showed them as childish and reckless. He never questioned whether these financial elites should run the system. So he reassured his readers that this excess, it was a deviation. It's not a feature. So his signature move is elite correction, not elite displacement. He writes books like Moneyball, The Big Short, Flash Boys, The Fifth Risk. The villains are the bad elites. The villains are the corrupt incentives, and the heroes are the smarter insiders, the better technocrats, the overlooked experts. Right? This framing is rewarded because it preserves elite power and coalition hierarchy. So Michael Lewis tells the elites how to be better. Doesn't tell them they should step aside. Tucker Carlson tells the elites, you should step aside, you're corrupt. So his audience is the professional managerial class, the managers, the regulators, the journos, the educated ones. Ordinary people are data points or victims. They're not agents. So this keeps Michael Lewis safely within elite polite society. So Michael Lewis has never troubled power. Right? He never forces a coalition test. You can agree with Michael Lewis, and it's not going to break your tribe. It's not going to break your status. So he will criticize markets and government and media while reaffirming we need enlightened governance by the right people, by the professional managerial class. That's what we need. We don't need these populist Trumpist insurgents. He never needed to radicalize because he has permanent access. People radicalize when their access closes. Michael Lewis's access never closed. So Michael Lewis has started leaning harder and harder into competence narratives and why we need this professional managerial class to run things. Systems fail because good people are ignored, not because the system served a different alliance. He is useful to power. Michael Lewis is useful to power. So he is a tremendous contrast with Tucker Carlson, Seymour, Hersh, or Mike Benz. Right? Tucker, Hersh, and Benz, they all attack power, threaten power. Right? They attack the legitimacy of power and the ruling coalition. Michael Lewis uses his access to power into helping power self-correct. So he is the ideal internal critic. He channels anger upward, but he resolves it inward. He is celebrated, funded, platformed indefinitely because he stabilizes the ruling elite. He stabilizes power arrangements. He doesn't threaten power and elite rule. And what about his predecessor, Tom Wolfe? Right? Tom Wolfe mastered elite access, then watched that elite harden and close ranks against him. So early Tom Wolfe thrived by flattering no one while serving everyone. He gave polite society a thrilling mirror without threatening power. He mocked status games, but he didn't challenge power. Elites tolerated him because he translated their world into exciting words. He just talked about culture. He didn't try to overthrow power. His peak alliance moment was his first novel, Bonfire of the Vanities. So it took on financiers, corrupt members of the media, politics, race hustlers, but all from inside the system. The book let elites say, yes, we have corrupt members, but we're still important. This is the sweet spot. Tom Wolfe could critique without getting excommunicated. Then the elite coalition shifted. So by the 1990s, cultural authority moved towards ever more credentialism, identity protection, and moral signaling. And satire that named hypocrisy across classes became dangerous. So broad-spectrum mockery loses permission from power once power needs to depend on taboo enforcement. Tom Wolfe refused to pick a side. He didn't kneel down to the new priesthood. He did not become a popular firebrand. He was stranded. So his later novels had less access. His later novels read less like interventions, more like documents from a man no longer inside the room where things were happening. He aged out like Fred Barnes. He didn't radicalize like Seymour, Hersh, or Tucker Carlson. Tom Wolfe didn't fall for conspiracies. He didn't try to gin up outrage to develop a new alliance. His method was to observe and to write in a way that was compelling. Once he stopped receiving access to what was going down, he had no replacement strategy. His reputation froze, didn't collapse. Tom Wolfe is honored, but he is not extended. He's treated respectfully, but he has no influence pipeline. He is a heritage, but his body of work is not consulted as authoritative. There are no biographies of Tom Wolfe in the works. So satire is accepted by elites when elites believe that the satire strengthens the power, strengthens their system, strengthens their status, because it allows for the venting of pressure. Now, once elites need discipline more than release, the satirist becomes a risk, and so they close access. So Tom Wolfe did not lose his talent in the 1990s. He lost his place in the dominant alliance. And unlike the edgelords, he refused to burn the village down to try to stay relevant.
Something that they could sort of laugh and roll their eyes at.
All right. Finally, at long last, winter has time to join Naked Wine's community. Head to
in that debate format, he kind of had to toe a partisan line that I think was difficult for him. And it wasn't that difficult. Like, he was cashing the paychecks and he liked being on TV. But I think it was a real problem with the war in Iraq. And I think, he had some private doubts about it. And he felt just constrained about saying them publicly. He felt like he couldn't, both in the job he had to do on CNN, where, it's every night he's debating with Paul Begala and James Carville about whether we should go to war in Iraq. Like, he kind of has to say we should, because that's what the Bush administration is saying. And also, it didn't help that Robert Novak was the other conservative who I think maybe by dint of seniority, was allowed to kind of be a little bit more.
Okay, Robert, you want to know if I believe that building the third temple and breeding a red heifer will make Jews rulers of the world. Seriously? You really want to know if I believe that? Do you really think that if I wave chickens over my head, I believe that my sins will be forgiven? Seriously, you think I believe that? Can you tell me your predictions on what will happen next? I don't have any. I don't know what will happen next. Why do Jews always want to live in Christian nations? They don't always want to live in Christian nations. Sometimes they want to live in their own nation. Sometimes they want to live in non-Christian nations. And where exactly are the Christian nations these days? So, for example, in America, Christianity is a mile wide and an inch deep. So I grew up in Australia where if someone was a Christian, they led a distinctive life. They had distinctive commitments. And I come to America and I notice there's no behavioral moral difference between Christians and non-Christians overwhelmingly. Christianity is overwhelmingly a low commitment social practice in America.
More free and voicing his own doubts about that invasion. So
it is interesting that, like you said, right, that like basically CNN, like his agent CNN and like the powers that be, like were like that was his issue. Like it's funny to think about Tucker now, but like the concern about him as a news performer was that like he wouldn't, be toe the party line. That's what they wanted for that show.
Yeah, no, he was a good soldier. And, I think like to his credit, he voiced his opposition to the war much sooner than I think almost any other conservative pundit who had supported it. I mean, he within a year, he was saying it was a mistake and he was embarrassed that he'd ever supported it. I mean, he certainly recanted a lot earlier than Bill Kristol and other people at the Standard did, if they ever did. And I think that was, that was like a real inflection point for him in terms of the way he just thought ideologically. Like, he had spent the first part of his career being very much in step with, guys like Kristol and people at the Standard and wanting to, excommunicate Pat Buchanan from polite society and the conservative movement. And then after Iraq, I think, he saw that Buchanan had been right and he started to think, all right, well, what else might this guy have been right about? And he started to kind of shift his positions on immigration and other things. This book is not like a biography of Tucker per se. It's more, about his professional life to kind of tell this larger story of conservative media and conservative politics. But after the Stewart humiliation, I think he felt it engendered some resentment in him.
People don't like being humiliated. Right? Humiliation sends people in a whole new direction. People love the feeling of pride. People love to believe how important they are to other people. People don't like losing status. So someone tells you something painful, embarrassing, humiliating, and then adds, I don't want to talk about it. So don't start talking about it. Don't keep talking about it. Don't say, oh, I just want you to know. Right? Just if someone tells you, I don't want to talk about it, respect that they don't want to talk about it, and it's not your mission, it's not your duty, right? It is not your moral responsibility to force them to talk about something they don't want to talk about it, right? They don't want to talk about it, don't talk about it. If you believe someone needs to make their own kefir, right, feel free to give them that unsolicited advice once. But if you give them that unsolicited advice 10 times, they're going to tell you, F you. They're either going to tell you F you explicitly or they're going to tell you F you implicitly. And if you don't recognize they're telling you F you, I told you, I don't want your unsolicited advice about the importance of making my own kefir. Right? You gotta listen to people. Right? If you have to give someone unsolicited advice, give it once. Don't repeat it. Don't go on and on about how important it is to make your own kefir. Right? Some people just want to buy their bloody kefir. Luke, do I really think that Christians regard other religions as satanic? Yes, I do believe that that is the human default, that if you are a true believer in your religion, your natural instinct will be to regard outside religions as satanic. Do they simply see them as misguided? That will be the socially acceptable and polite thing to say, but what they really feel is that it's satanic. People don't usually say what they mean. People don't usually mean what they say. People instead say whatever they think the situation requires. Christians think that Jews can find salvation if they just stop despising Jesus. There are many different Christian reactions to Jews and salvation. Overall, the more strongly identifying your in-group, such as Christian, right, the more negative feelings you will have about out-groups, including about including about Jews. The way to heaven is hell, and the way to hell is heaven. I guess I'm going to hell. I have no idea what to say about that. Okay, let's talk about the Seymour Hersh trajectory. He is a journalist who is the subject of a documentary on Netflix right now. Back in 1969, he broke the story of the My Lai massacre. He received the 1970 Pulitzer Prize. He was a member of the journalistic establishment until essentially it drove him out. So he engaged in a series of alliance realignments. So early Hersh attacked power on behalf of a rising elite power faction. He was not a lone truth teller. He was a weapon whose facts served an intra-elite struggle. This is why certain institutions amplified him. Then this faction attained power, and Seymour Hersh became surplus. Journalism professionalized. The new priestly journalism class wanted credibility, process, restraint. Seymour Hersh's temperament did not fit. So his iconoclasm was tolerated only as long as he was useful. When journalism professionalized after Watergate, Seymour Hersh's iconoclasm became a liability. So when the elite media converged around a narrow and narrower consensus on U.S. power, intelligence agencies, foreign policy, his reporting no longer served the dominant alliance. He did not change as much as the ruling coalition changed. So Seymour Hersh becomes locked out of institutions. He faces a choice. He can moderate and turn himself down to try to re-enter elite institutions, or he can radicalize to build a new following, to join a new alliance. He chose the second path. So more extreme claims become sorting devices. They signal who is willing to defect with you, and facts stop mattering along the way. So Seymour Hersh's stories became less and less about persuading people skeptical of his claims. Instead, they are more and more designed to bind a new counter-elite audience that already believes that America's primary institutions lie. So his work shifted from truth arbitration to loyalty confirmation. Every system generates people who feel expelled by the elites. Seymour Hersh offers them a prestigious dissident anchor. His reputation does the coalition work. You don't need to believe his every claim. You just need to believe him. Polite society recoils because accepting the late career Seymour Hersh implies that the post-war foreign policy consensus was rotten to the core. So alliances defend themselves by labeling the messenger unstable rather than engaging on the facts, rather than reopening the narrative. So Seymour Hersh did not go mad. He lost his standing in the elite alliance. He refused to submit to its decrees. And then after that, he lashed out as a rebel and someone who was a member of the counter-elite.
And towards, his friends kind of in elite media circles, elite political circles, who he felt didn't really come to his aid the way he would have liked them to. And I think that resentment, kind of grew over the years as his own professional struggles increased. And, eventually it kind of gained full flower in MAGA and Trump.
The other part from that era that's interesting is this clip goes around all the time, which is Tucker just witheringly taking down Bill O'Reilly for being a fake vanguard of the people, and it's like every critique he has of Bill O'Reilly is relevant to him now, where he basically talks about how he's trying to pretend like he's a populist, and eventually that the mask will fall. And I think that when people watch that, it does leave us with a feeling, I don't really know Tucker like some of these other people, and I've met him, but I don't really know him, that he's just a really good performer. Right? That he was able to deliver that, and he's able to deliver the takedown of the.
Okay, let's go to the chat. Satana says the message of the Bible is compassion, mercy, forgiveness, and justice. There are many messages in the Bible. Those are among the messages, but you'll find many other messages. How can Israelis live with daily love for war and destruction? Well, what Israelis live for is it is better to live than to die and to be slaughtered, right? Israelis think that they don't want to be slaughtered by their enemies. And any group that does not put a priority on its own survival is probably not going to be around very long. So Israelis don't want to die, and they are willing to live with your opprobrium if in exchange they can live. Now, you would like to see Israelis die, right? It would bring you great joy to see another 6 million Jews slaughtered, and you'd like them to go quietly. But Jews don't want to go quietly into some kind of mass slaughter, and they're even willing to be impolite and even assertive in protecting their own right to survive. Now, I know you think Jews don't have any right to survive, but Jews disagree with you. We want to live. You want Jews to die. We want to live. And we're even willing to live and have you think ill of us. We think that is a superior option in life than to die and have you praise us. When you fight, everyone loses. No. When you refuse to fight, you die in many circumstances. So it's very tempting to want to opt out of reality, opt out of fighting, opt out of the vicious nature of reality, how different groups have different interests, and sometimes those clashes of interests are so intense that the groups go to war with each other. That is the nature of the world. So you can ignore reality, you can ignore Darwinism, right? But reality will flow on even if you try to ignore it. So let's think about Maria Bartiromo. What a career. So she started out as a translator between elites. She was at CNBC, and she served capital. She served CEOs of markets and institutions. Right? She was a prestige builder. She was valuable but replaceable. Then her role changes when Donald Trump comes along. She starts primarily facing the base. Not as a reporter, not as an analyst. She becomes a ritual figure who reassures the Trump base that their enemies are evil and that their intuitions are right. So once she occupies this role, her factual failures don't really matter. Now, she promoted many incorrect stories on her show, and Fox had to pay out about $700 million to settle a lawsuit from Dominion Enterprises. And yet she kept her job. And the coalition that she anchors was not weakened. It remained loyal. So she did her job. Why didn't Fox fire her? Because that would signal defection to the base. It'd be read not as accountability, but as surrender. So people like Maria Bartiromo, leaders who stabilize and protect and advocate for a coalition, even when they lie and cheat and do terrible things, right? They keep power as long as they are aligned with the interests of the coalition. So some Fox performers are just interchangeable. If they are fired, it doesn't matter. But Maria Bartiromo has a special connection to the Trump base. Her audience believes her personally, and so removing her risks fragmentation. Alliances are willing to tolerate enormous collateral damage to avoid this. Why does she still have a show on Fox? Because her presence communicates continuity. Nothing has changed. This message is more important than credibility and ratings and lawsuits. So why did Fox lawyers lose and Maria won? Because lawyers optimize for the survival of the institution. Alliances optimize for signaling loyalty. So Maria Bartiromo did not cost Fox hundreds of millions of dollars as much as she helped prevent something far worse. Right? She prevented a base that no longer trusts Fox at all, and so paying out $700 million to keep a base trusting Fox is why she still has her job.
Populist right affect with just as much aplomb and passion as he's able to deliver the populist right line. But
don't you think his persona is different than O'Reilly's? I mean, I feel like O'Reilly definitely pretended to be the guy at the bar, right? Whereas Tucker, I think, is more of like a class trader. Like that's the role that he's playing. You know, he still like has, you know, the rep ties and the Rolex and, you know, I mean, like he drinks a bottle of Perrier, literally, like it's a branded bottle of Perrier. And I think it's a lot like Trump being able to say, you know, I've been in the rooms with, you know, those people and I know what they say about you. And I'm here to tell you everything that you think about them is true because I saw it with my own eyes. And I think that gives him, you know, some credibility. Like he's not pretending to be an everyman. I think that like it's a different I mean, it's still a populist shtick, but it's in some ways, I think it's more authentic to who he is. And I think that actually gives him some credibility with his audience. Yeah. So that the mask, you know, when the mask finally slipped on O'Reilly, people are just like, yeah, that guy's full of it. And with Tucker, I don't know if his audience necessarily feels that way.
I guess that's true. And it's different in some ways than on others. I guess the point is that like he was on policy matters. Like he was a very effective.
So let's think about Tucker Carlson's mentor, who he now loathes, Bill Kristol, right? And he is a classic textbook case of alliance roles cycling from insurgent to priest. So early Bill Kristol was a sanctioned bomb thrower. So he was the outside enforcer inside conservatism, constantly attacking the Democrats and the Clintons, agitating for confrontation, framing politics as a moral struggle. He wanted to make normal the permanent warfare rhetoric, right? And this was all authorized disruption. So alliances need these young, aggressive figures to break norms, move the Overton window, and test how far conflict can be pushed. Bill Kristol was excellent at that job. So he was never anti-institutional. He was always part of the conservative establishment. He was anti-current occupants of institutions. That makes him promotable. So when alliances consolidate power, they no longer need bomb throwers. They need legitimacy managers. So the most articulate and the most disciplined bomb throwers and insurgents get elevated into priestly roles once their aggression has done its work. So Bill Kristol was elevated from a bomb thrower to a priestly role. He moved from mobilizing anger to defining right and wrong, to defining boundaries. Who is responsible? What is serious? What is beyond the pale? So Bill Kristol helped sell the 2003 Iraq War with tremendous insurgent energy. The Iraq War was a disaster. The alliance didn't purge him. It just repositioned him. Right? True bomb throwers get discarded. Bill Kristol was retained because he's always loyal to the structure. He never attacked the structure, the alliance, the power itself. He attacked the enemies of his alliance. Then comes Donald Trump. Donald Trump broke the contract. All right, he took down the ruling conservative alliance. He threatened donor networks, credential hierarchies, foreign policy consensus, free markets and free trade. He threatened the ruling moral authority on the right. And Bill Kristol was not happy. Trump was rude. And, more importantly, Trump had displaced the priestly class. So Bill Kristol became the moral guardian. Tone mattered. Now, the bomb thrower, the reckless, vitriolic political agitator, is now lecturing us about how important moral tone is, that norms matter, democracy matters, institutions matter. Right? His role changed. He was once a vandal, but now he's become a priest. Right? Both roles, he gave the power what it wanted. Now, polite society rewards repentance from former hardliners who now defend the institutions. Right? This is proof that the system is open and moral and self-correcting. So Bill Kristol is useful. He didn't betray his principles. He fulfilled his function for the power at each stage. First, he destabilized enemies. Then he sanctified the order. Right? The most dangerous young men often become the most sanctimonious elders. And that is the case with Bill Kristol.
Advocate against,
Yes.
the Buchananite or, wing before he became a very effective advocate for it. And there's ways in which, and this is the other thing that you talk about that's very relevant right now, it's a way in which he's similar to J.D. Vance. Yeah. And I think like at some level there's this question, of like, does it matter whether this has been an authentic transit, switch or not? Maybe not. Yeah. But at some level it matters a little bit, I guess, whether he and JD did this authentically or what.
And the chat says that Israel should stay away from American internal affairs. Well, what if American internal affairs are vital for Israel's interests? Did you know that the leadership of the United Kingdom is spying on American internal affairs right now? And the leadership of France and Germany and Holland and Israel and Japan and China and Australia, they're all engaged in spying on American internal affairs. Why would they do such a horrible thing? Because it's in their self-interest. Now, why is the United States spying on dozens of foreign countries and intervening all over the world? Because the foreign policy establishment finds that exciting, finds that thrilling. They find prestige doing that. And sometimes it's allied with American interests. So what's good for the individual in the American foreign policy establishment, what brings him excitement and meaning and purpose and status, it's not necessarily good for America, but sometimes it is. Right? The higher quality your information, right, the more access you have to prestige and power and to jobs. Right? If you are able to gin up a widespread belief that we're in a new Cold War with China, right, that means many more jobs for China specialists in the American foreign policy establishment. If you're able to gin up that we're in a new Cold War with shooting war with Iran, and how vital it is that America bombs Iran, there are dozens of elite high-status jobs to be had making that. If you want to make the case that we're in a new Cold War with Russia and Vladimir Putin, there are many high-status, well-paying, prestigious positions available to you if you will make that propagandistic case. Right? It's exciting to spy and to intervene and to make very dramatic moral pronouncements about how evil the Chinese are, how evil Vladimir Putin is, how evil Russia is, how evil Iran is, how evil Hamas and Hezbollah are. Right? There's status, there's money, there's power, there's prestige for issuing these moral denouncements of America's enemies and pushing for intervention all over the world. Right? You want to deny people these opportunities for power and status? Right? People will live for status and power and money. Do I truly want to live in Israel? At times I have thought about it, but I have chosen instead to live in the United States of America. If I were to give you a home in Israel, would you move to Israel? Not right now, but who knows? Maybe tomorrow it will be different. Attacking Americans is fatal for your health, but getting clear information about what's going on with America may be vital for your health. Everything you say is being documented. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Israelis are 8 million pussycats who don't know how to fight their own battles. Yes, that's why they just lose, right? Even though the Arab Muslims around them outnumber them 100 to 1, I'm just thinking now about all those wars where the Arabs and the Muslims just absolutely kicked Israeli ass, right? It's happened time and time again. That's why Israel has always lost its wars, outnumbered 100 to 1 and just nothing but losing. You're so right, man. You're so profound. Israel doesn't know how to fight. Israel just loses because it doesn't know how to fight. How sharp and smart and wise you are. If only the rest of the world would listen to you.
Whether they were able to, kind of ride a populist wave.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I mean, I think there are, obviously cynical positioning decisions that both made, when they sort of recognized that this was where things were headed and the way the wind was blowing. At the same time, I do think that their resentment towards.
And the chat says that Israel is picking wars with the most powerful nations on earth and presumably has done this for millennia. So if you strongly identify with your in-group, you are highly incentivized to say all sorts of horrible and frequently untrue things about out-groups. Why are you incentivized to do that? Because everybody wants to hear how their in-group is wonderful and out-groups are terrible. So facts, truth, empirical reality, right, they don't interest you, they don't provide you with any meaning or excitement or serve any function in your alliance. But if you can come up with a vivid story if you can just send out signals about how committed you are to your particular in-group, to your particular alliance, then truth, facts, empirical reality, absolutely irrelevant. You just have to say something that's exciting and that feels good, that lands for people. Do I want to make it illegal for Americans to boycott Israel? I do not. Is that an act of war? I find it hard to believe that even such legislation that I oppose is an act of war, but please enlighten me. How is this crazy legislation that tries to penalize people for BDE, boycott, what is it? BDE, boycott, divest. What's that campaign? So it's hilarious. The pro-Israel crowd for decades mourned, well, why can't our enemies just make the case against Israel peacefully? So then comes along BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction, right? Now the anti-Israel crowd is proceeding peacefully, just as the pro-Israel crowd had pleaded with them for decades. Why can't they just make their case peacefully? So along comes BDS, makes the case peacefully. It's like, oh, no, that's illegitimate. Well, guess what? Different groups have different interests. Sometimes your interest will be in bringing down your enemy through force. Sometimes your interest will be best served by bringing down your enemy through information. Other times, your interest will be best served by hammering and damaging allies of your enemy, making it as painful and difficult and costly as possible to be allied with your enemy. So sometimes nonviolent means are most effective or most congenial. Sometimes violent means, sometimes information means, sometimes coalitional ways are most effective. So sure, different groups have different interests, and the boycott, BDS, boycott, divest, sanction movement has been very effective against Israel. And I'm outraged by it. No, I'm not outraged. I would expect it. Enemies of Israel are frequently very effective. They have assembled formidable coalitions. They have done great damage to their enemy, just as I would expect. Count me as an enemy, please. Fine. Forcing states to buy Israeli bonds instead of American bonds that have higher yields, that's an act of war. Well, which states are forced to buy Israeli bonds? I am not in favor of forcing anyone to say anything about Israel or to buy any bonds. Free markets, free minds, that's my motto.
Certain parts of society, certain people, David Frum or whatever. I think that's real. And there's like a deep-seated resentment they both have towards.
They're just looking out at the world,
and they're
looking out at all of the people in there and all of the indignities that they've suffered and all of the people causing pain, and they're like, it's that David Frum.
Yeah,
that
Bill
really
Kristol and
is
David
the one.
Frum. Those are the two, which is, maybe less Kristol for JD, but certainly for Tucker. Someone once said to me that, like, the two people who screwed up Tucker most are his mother and Bill Kristol.
So I guess this question, though, goes to, I think, an important underlying, like, kind of fact about Tucker and about JD, which is about how authentic this is, which is, okay, like, they've suffered a lot of indignities over the years, and you wrote very
Such a naive question, as though there is an authentic self. Who we are depends on our alliance, on who we love and who we hate, and what the situation requires. We all respond to incentives. So in 1999, Matt Labash wrote about me in, I think it was a cover story for the Weekly Standard. I wasn't the primary focus of the article. We met at the World Pornography Conference. Maybe you were there. And Matt Labash said I looked like an acid-washed Brad Pitt. And Matt Labash was a witty writer for the Weekly Standard. Then the Weekly Standard shuts down in 2018. He's kind of a never Trump Republican, never Trump conservative. So what would alliance theory say about the Matt Labash journalism career trajectory? And the alliance theory says he's a high-status, non-aligned talent who refused durable coalition capture and plateaued rather than converted influence into power. He maximized insider access without giving insider loyalty. He embedded with elites across political parties and movements, but he never became reliable for any faction. Alliance systems reward predictability. People reward predictability. We all want friends, lovers, members of our life who are predictable. We want bosses who are predictable. We want employees who are predictable. We want co-workers who are predictable. We all like predictability because then we can use our cognitive functions for other things and trying to figure out what people will do next. Predictability just makes our life easier. So Matt Labash is funny, he's sharp, he's perceptive, but he is not institutionally dependable, and that caps his advancement. His satire weakens his utility to power. He punctures myths. He pricks the pomposity of power. Right? He gives us great writing, but doesn't provide a lot of value to the ruling power structure. So alliances want to promote and advance and care and nurture people who launder their preferred stories, not those who expose their vanity and absurdity. So usually success in a coalition and in an institution requires clear signaling. You let people know who you're for and who you hate. And Labash has consistently declined to perform that sorting. So these Matt Labash admired, but not amplified and not protected. Matt Labash chooses craft over narrative, right? Over alliance with power. Right? He is a luxury good. Right? Editors love him, readers remember him, but he doesn't serve alliances. Right? Alliance media will give you attention if you affirm them. Matt Labash gave power attention, but he withheld his affirmation. This is a bad trade for institutions. They want to be affirmed. He never became a brand. He didn't radicalize or polarize to gain leverage. He didn't want to lead a faction. He was like Tom Wolfe. He just wanted to observe. He preserved his integrity and limited his power. You may ask, why does talent not win? Non-alignment doesn't win. So Matt Labash, highly talented, but not willing to play the alliance power game. And the power system noticed, and it refused to reward him.
Interestingly, about how Tucker was jealous and hated Steve Bannon, because of Breitbart's rise, back when he was running the Daily Caller and they were competitive. And, I guess he had asked his staffers to try to prove that Steve Bannon was full of shit. They're going to do investigations into Steve Bannon. And these days, like that Tucker's resentment towards Steve Bannon isn't driving him, because that would be harmful, right? To position himself that way, right? It's a little bit revealing that, it's the mother that abandoned him and Bill Kristol's a much safer person to be resentful towards than the other people that he could be resentful towards, the Fox leadership, Bannon, right? For whom he still needs to appeal to those crowds.
Well, Bill kind of serves as this skeleton key that he's used to kind of retcon his entire, career and trajectory and kind of change. Because the story that he tells, I think other people, but also himself, is that he was this talented, young, naive kid.
So why is every modern Orthodox neighborhood in the United States steadily becoming Haredi? Right? Why do modern Orthodox neighborhoods drift Haredi? Because alliances reward cohesion. Modern Orthodox Judaism is structurally unstable. It's an incredibly difficult, demanding, challenging, and expensive way of life. It tries to hold two alliances at once that are very difficult to maintain. One, full participation in modern liberal society. Two, strong commitment to traditional Jewish law and the traditional Jewish way of life. So American Jews, like other minorities, want to be able to celebrate their distinctive ways of life and patterns, and at the same time have full integration into all of America, not pay any price whatsoever for their particular commitments. Now, modern Orthodox Judaism works for some high IQ individuals, but it doesn't scale well, particularly not at the neighborhood level. Haredi life solves the alliance problem better. So Haredi Jews reproduce much more than modern Orthodox Jews, who in turn have many more children than secular Jews. So Haredi families have more children, earlier children, and they keep them local more effectively than modern Orthodox Jews. The Haredi traditional Jew spends far more time and invests far more in the neighborhood and its institutions. So steadily, Orthodox Jewish shuls, schools, street culture, all shifts in a Haredi direction. No ideology required. Demography is destiny because demography equals alliance destiny. The traditional Jew is steadily capturing Orthodox Jewish institutions, shuls, schools, committees, kashrut boards, mikvos, all written by whoever shows up and stays. And the Haredi Jew is more willing, the traditional Jew is more willing to invest, to sacrifice in this traditional way of life because their entire social world depends on it. Modern Orthodox professionals have weaker incentives. They may primarily identify as dentists or doctors or university professors. So norms harden around the most committed faction. Haredi norms are clear. They're more easily enforceable when it comes to dress and separation of the sexes and education, boundaries, and rabbinic authority. Modern Orthodoxy is pluralistic and permissive and nuanced. So in alliance terms, permissive systems lose territory to strict systems because strict systems can say no. And once neighborhood tilts, the cost of being lax rises and the cost of being strict falls. So when a neighborhood starts steadily shifting towards traditional Judaism rather than modern Orthodox liberal Judaism, those modern Orthodox families on the margins are more and more likely to leave such neighborhoods rather than traditional Haredi Jewish families. So modern Orthodox families have better options. They have weaker sunk costs. And each modern Orthodox exit accelerates the shift to Haredi Judaism. In Jewish communal life, seriousness is signaled through behavior, through commitment, through practice. Haredi practices are high commitment signals. Modern Orthodox practices are lower commitment signals. It's not easy to distinguish principled moderation from laziness and laxity. So status flows towards the faction that can most credibly signal sacrifice. This isn't about theology. It's about mixed neighborhoods will trend toward the faction with higher fertility, stronger institutions, clearer boundaries, lower exit rates, higher moral norm enforcement capacity. That faction is traditional Judaism, Haredi Judaism. Modern Orthodoxy survives where it can control institutions from the start, where geography limits encroachment from traditional Jews, but when space is shared, modern Orthodoxy loses ground slowly but relentlessly.
Who the Bill Kristol and the neocons got their hooks into him when he was, young and made him, tricked him into supporting the war in Iraq and tricked him into supporting open borders and tricked him into supporting free trade and all these other things that harmed white working class Americans. And, eventually the scales fell from his eyes. And now what he's doing is penance to make up for, being used by the neocons. And I think that, that story is bullshit.
And so that also explains, the apologia for Putin and the mullahs.
Exactly. No,
if the neocons were wrong, then the mullahs have to be right, I think. There's some limits to that.
I mean, there is something to that, though.
Is there?
One person close to him who is, I think, troubled by.
So we didn't have a TV in my home until 1980, after I was 14. But I would sometimes go to the homes of my friends, and they would have a TV. And starting around age 14 or 15, I thought the greatest job in the world is to be a TV news anchor. That was probably my ambition from about age 14 to age 19 when I decided I wanted to become an economist. So one of my favorite movies is about TV news. It's called Broadcast News. Came out in 1987. And it's about one woman and two guys. But I live in a world of the intellectual. So I want to talk about broadcast news as coalition sorting inside elite institutions. So a newsroom is a status guild, right? It pretends to reward truth and merit and accuracy. What it truly rewards are traits and practices and words that stabilize the institution's power, advertisers, and audience trust. That's the real coalition. So the woman in this movie, Jane, she represents internal legitimacy. She's all about the norms of good journalism. She's very morally serious, right? She's highly respected, but she has very little upward mobility because she is not a good ambassador for the power structure. She's not smooth with the power. Now, Tom, not the most brilliant guy around, but he gives great value to the power structure. He is emotionally legible. That means people can relate to him. He is attractive. He's reassuring. He's not threatening. It's not painful or filled with friction to interact with him. He is loved by the audience, and he's loved by elites. And that he's not so great on facts, that's a feature, not a bug. Now, Aaron, he's brilliant, right? He represents epistemic purity, but he provides no value to the power. He's smart, he's often right, but he's destabilizing. He threatens the power because he doesn't mount the correct performances. He doesn't smooth the narratives. He doesn't emotionally calibrate to soothe the power structure and to soothe the audience. So institutions will always choose alliance maintenance over truth. Tom rises because he strengthens the alliance. Jane stalls because she's not serving the alliance. Aaron is pushed out because he creates problems for the alliance. So Jane's heartbreak here is structural. She wants a world where competence and truth and accuracy and good journalistic norms and high integrity win status. This world doesn't exist. Institutions choose by elevating people who protect power, who protect the alliance, who protect the institution, who protect relationships. Journalistic institutions don't choose people on the basis of them being right or accurate. The movie's moral tension comes from this misalignment of selection pressures. So the audience roots for Jane and Aaron because they're so morally serious, but the system doesn't usually reward morally serious. It may reward the performance of moral seriousness. The system rewards shallow but relatable people like Tom. So Jane doesn't sell out. She simply adapts. She learns the reality of her institution, and she chooses survival over futile resistance. So Tom is able to cry on cue. And alliances love emotional display that is legible and copacetic. It doesn't matter if he's sincere. Alliances and institutions want employees who are controllable. Tom wins because he can perform authenticity without disabling or disturbing or challenging anyone. Broadcast news is not nostalgia for lost journalism. It's realism. It's brutal realism. It shows you the nature of reality. Institutions sort people on the basis of their value to the institution, to the coalition, to the alliance, not on the basis of merit or truth or accuracy, right? Institutions sort people on the basis of, do you preserve trust? Do you preserve the alliance? Do you strengthen the institution? Or do you create friction and disruption? Do you threaten the equilibrium? Right? Truth is secondary to these goals. Now, if you can be truthful and serve these goals, that's wonderful. Good for you.
The anti-Semitism said, and he wasn't like excusing it, but I think he was trying to explain it. He said, it really did start, he thought, because like basically all the people who were opposed to him were pro-Israel. And he decided to just kind of like go after Israel because it was a way to stick it to them. And, it's obviously turned into something else. And I think, and this person, I think, recognizes that, but that's what this person thought the origins of it were. And I don't know, but I thought he has a desire to stick it to his enemies, right? And find things that will, piss them off. And oftentimes that's liberals. But I think.
Oh my God, Tucker Carlson, did you hear that? He has a desire to stick it to his enemies. That is so weird. Is there anyone else on this planet who also desires to stick it to his enemies and to help his friends? Let me think about that. Okay, I've thought about that, and now I realize that is a universal part of the human condition. We all desire to stick it to our enemies and to support our friends. If you didn't have these desires, you would not live very well, right? We evolved to want to stick it to our enemies and to support our friends because that is highly adaptive. That is a far superior way to go through life than just being neutral and not having any friends. Right? That is not an adaptive strategy for life. But this author, Jason Zengerle, he's shocked. Tucker Carlson, he wants to stick it to his enemies. Whoever heard of such a human impulse? This author, Jason Zengerle, and the podcast host, Tim, right? They don't want to stick it to their enemies and support their friends. They're above such tribal concerns.
I think there's something there too with some of these conservatives as well.
All right, we've been talking about that, Gold, and so it's also important to bring up Israel and the Likudniks and the Mossad and all the time, apropos of nothing.
Yeah.
When talking about people are totally on other topics.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if there has to be more to it than that he's mad at his former staff colleagues from 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think, clearly it's bigger than that. And his own, I think, increasing kind of religiosity, I think, has something to do with it as well. And also, I think he's made the calculus that that's where the energy is on the right these days, and that's where things are headed. And, he has a really, really, really finely tuned political and professional radar. And I think we've seen that, a lot in the past. We've seen that, good examples of that in the past, 7 or 8 years. And I don't know if his radar is wrong this time or not, but he certainly seems to think that that's where things are headed. And in order to be successful in, the spaces that he operates now, both politically and in media, he can't afford to have those people, not on his side.
I want to ask about 2 other potential skeleton keys. Maybe it wasn't his mother and Bill. Maybe there are other people that have influenced him. His brother, Buckley Carlson. Do you follow Buckley on social media?
Buckley's emergence as a social media star is that has been a surprise. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I want to. We'll put a pin in Buckley for a second, and then also what you wrote about in the book at length was when he was trying to outflank Steve Bannon at Daily Caller, and he hired a lot of young.
So if you're an American populist nationalist, you get energy and support and attention from criticizing Israel, from tweaking Israel, because Israel, in the minds of populist nationalists in America, represents globo homo. It represents some kind of foreign entanglement that is dangerous for American welfare. It represents a disruption of following American interests because elites have conspired and they've created this lobby, and it has distorted American foreign policy interests. So Tucker goes where the incentives are, just like I go where the incentives are and you go where the incentives are. So Tucker has an audience, a populist nationalist audience. And the author of this new book and the podcast host, they have a different audience. They have a different alliance that they play to. And I have a different alliance that I play to, as distinct from all of those characters, right? I play to the alliance of truth optimizers. We're a band of brothers. We're a few, but we're the best blokes around.
White nationalists. And I don't say this in the broad, we're smearing people and calling everyone white supremacists. He hired literally avowed white nationalists who are on white nationalist listservs who now, after they left working for Tucker,
oh my God, that's awful. Now, seriously, in reality, someone who identifies as a white nationalist is so against caring about what's socially acceptable that they are highly likely to be antisocial personalities, and so there is probably some powerful rational reasons why people are aghast by such nationalists. But identity and hero systems run along many lines. So for some people, it's ethnicity, it's ancestry, it's blood, it's soil. For other people, it's theology or profession.
Some of them I still follow on social media, see what they're up to. Their bios still basically declare themselves as white nationalists.
List their IQ, right? their height and their IQ.
Scott Greer was one of them. But
So you can call Scott Greer all sorts of terrible names. I'm sure he's like everybody else. He's said and done terrible things, but sometimes Scott Greer has wise and profound and clarifying things to say. People are complicated. Look, I will show you the laws that have been passed, presumably trying to penalize criticism of Israel. So I don't want laws passed penalizing criticism of Israel. I don't want laws passed against BDS. I don't want laws passed distorting American interests in favor of Israel or any foreign nation. I'm America first, bro.
It does seem like he might have been influenced by them, right? I mean, like this turn, like he hires all these young white nationalists at the Daily Caller, and that happens right around the same time he starts doing his populist nationalist anti-Semitic stuff.
Yeah, although some of the anti-Semitic stuff, I mean, I feel like that's really come into focus in the past, 2 or 3 years before the Caller. It was, and he wasn't saying
Great
it
Replacement,
himself.
right? Like Great Replacement stuff
yes.
does feel like kind of like it was a bottom-up thing. Like I don't know if that.
So plenty of leading Democratic politicians have celebrated the Great Replacement. So, yes, there are heinous people who push the Great Replacement. I don't believe in the Great Replacement. It's not a theme of mine. It's not something that I endorse. But there are plenty of people on the left and the right who just love the idea of a Great Replacement.
It came out of Tucker's head. It came out of his flunkies' heads, and then
he
got
definitely.
excited about it.
What Tucker did, especially at Fox, was he would take these sort of, stories in the news or theories or ideas that existed just on the far right fringe, usually somewhere on the internet, and he would smuggle it on to primetime on Fox. And, I think Great Replacement is probably the best example of that. I mean, he brought that to, the attention of just like mainstream conservatives, and he presented it in such a way that, it might not have been palatable to you or me, but I think to a Fox viewer, it was probably more palatable than if they had read it in its original form and, the Scott Greer form or whatever. And that was, Tucker was like this conveyor belt for this stuff.
So I am more than halfway through this new biography of Tucker Carlson. It is so good. It is fair. It's excellent. Now, some parts of it, some of the analysis I don't think is fair. The title about how Tucker is destroying the conservative mind, I think that's ludicrous. But the content of the book overwhelmingly is fair and fun to read. Just excellent, excellent book.
And, he continues to do that to this day. And I think that he's successful at it because, unlike Scott Greer, or unlike, Alex Jones is like a better example. Like Alex Jones says loony shit, right? But Alex Jones is a loon. So you're going to kind of, take what he says with a grain of salt. Like Tucker, I think still presents like as a fairly credible figure. And so when he says it has a credibility maybe that it wouldn't have with most of the people who traditionally deliver that message.
He's good at doing his shtick, which like is basically like, how could you disagree with this? Like he takes radical things and then tries to reframe them to make them in a way that.
Well, that which is radical depends on the nature of your hero system, right? Many of your ideas are radical to me and they make perfect sense to you. So Tucker's radical ideas are radical to you, but they're not radical to people who share a similar hero system to Tucker Carlson. The position of the observer is an integral part of the data here.
That it feels like you'd have to be insane to disagree with them. Like, and that's, and a lot of crazy people they like the crazy part, right? Like
exactly.
So, you know what I mean? And so they emphasize the more extreme element.
And the chat is not a big fan of the Israel lobby. So there's a China lobby, there's a Saudi lobby, there's an Israel lobby, there's old people's lobby, there's a pharmaceutical lobby, and different lobbies try to pursue the interests of their particular alliance, whether it's the Israel lobby or the China lobby. It's just that the Israel lobby has been more effective than pretty much any other lobby.
Elements of it. And I do think that's a pernicious part of Tucker's program.
Definitely. And,
And what counts as pernicious depends entirely on the nature of your hero system. So these guys have a liberal hero system. And so Tucker's tribal, nationalist, populist hero system is offensive to them, right? These guys believe in rule by elites. They believe in the power of disinterested expertise, right? They generally in favor of America's institutions and the way that they currently operate. So if you like America's institutions, you're going to hate Donald Trump. If you don't like the way America's institutions operate, you're going to likely love Donald Trump and Tucker.
The January 6th documentary and all of that. I mean, it was just, you watch that, and compare it to some of the 9/11.
So people love documentaries, not on the basis whether they're factual or accurate usually. They love polarizing documentaries on the basis of, does this make me feel good about my alliance? And does this diminish and demean the enemy?
Conspiracy theory documentaries, and like it's just night and day. Oh, he's also now 9/11.
The power of conspiracy theories has absolutely nothing to do with truth or facts or empirical reality. A conspiracy theory is a narrative, and if it brings excitement and meaning and purpose and helps your coalition feel good, then the conspiracy theory serves the purveyor of the conspiracy theory. If you got a conspiracy theory that makes the enemy look bad, then your conspiracy theory will bring comfort and sustenance and energy and will be blessed and welcomed by your alliance, even if it's not true.
Conspiracy theorists too. So.
Are there any that he doesn't have yet?
I don't know about Freemasons. I'm not sure where he is on that.
Flat Earth?
So do the Amish have a powerful lobby? Do the Hutterites have a powerful lobby? Do the Mennonites have a powerful lobby? No, because they're not incentivized to do so. These are all groups that live quietly in peace with their neighbors, and they don't need some powerful lobby operating on their behalf. So different groups have different interests. Different groups have different vulnerabilities.
So that's a good question. Him and Kyrie Irving would be a hell of a backcourt.
I want to go back to Buckley for a second, because I don't know. Maybe this is just me, but I've started, as you said, he's emerged. I don't know when it started or when he started. It's kind of one of these things where maybe he's been posting since 2011 and I just noticed it 2 months ago, or maybe he just started posting 2 months ago. I'm not sure. This is kind of what happens. So the social media age. But his brother starts coming into my field of vision, and his posts are insane. And he sounds indistinguishable from Alex Jones. Much more.
So one man's insane meme or insane social media post is like divine truth to another man. It all depends on the nature of your hero system. It is not marked out by the will of heaven that this particular host, Tim, has the hero system which transcends all other hero systems. Right? He's just got another partisan, subjective hero system. Tucker Carlson's got another partisan, subjective hero system. We all do. Right? We all need to feel as though our choices in our lives have internal significance and meaning, so we all subscribe to a hero system. Doesn't make them globally, universally true. They are useful.
More unapologetic about his, extreme views.
What counts as extreme depends on the nature of your hero system, depends on the nature of what you believe in. I suspect that to Buckley, his views are not extreme, they're just common sense.
And Tucker calls him his best friend.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, like, it also feels like, this happens to people. Tucker is, where is it? He's either in rural Maine or in Florida. South Florida, and he's a little bit isolated, and that, like, his crazy.
Yeah, the more isolated I get, the more weird I get. It's a very bad downward spiral. And isolation does not usually enhance alignment with reality.
Crazy conspiracy mongering brother.
Right. We evolved to live in the middle of the tribe. The further you get away from the middle of the tribe, the more danger you are in.
Is influencing that? Is that a crazy thing to think?
I don't know. I mean, he is his best friend. Like, they are incredibly close. Before his father died last year, like, just the three of them are pretty inseparable. It's interesting. Like, when I did a Don Jr. profile back in the first Trump administration, and talking to sort of Don Jr.'s brain trust, and I remember they were telling me that when he would send out tweets, like they would workshop the tweets and go over them, and if there was a tweet that they deemed it was like too hot, it was too much, they didn't want it coming from Don Jr.'s account, they would have someone else tweet. Arthur Schwartz would usually tweet it. And like, it has, like, I have wondered, like, is Buckley kind of tweeting the stuff that, Tucker himself can't say, or he feels like it's too hot for him to say? I have no idea if that's the case, but I did have that thought. He's just sort of like a more amped up version of Tucker. I feel like he's just a less polite version of Tucker. He's kind of like Tucker's id.
It doesn't seem fake for him. I guess this is my point to this fundamental question, right? It's like, okay, maybe it isn't fake, actually. Like, maybe his brother seems legitimately insane. And so maybe, and they're their best friends. And so, it's kind of like somebody whose wife is, extreme, or husband, right? Whose spouse like influences their politics. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I knew a lot of people who were into Pizzagate and QAnon, and it just made life more exciting. It was a narrative that supported their side. It painted the enemy, the globalists, the Democratic Party elites, right, as evil pedos. And so conspiracy theories, like other narratives, serve needs. Now, the people I know who are really into QAnon, right, when QAnon didn't work out as they expected, right, their life went on. Usually these type of conspiracy theories are just a way to add like more pizzazz and energy and excitement to your life, right? You get a narrative that makes life clear, says here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, this is how evil the bad guys are, this is how good the good guys are. We've got this majestic character who's going to save us, Donald Trump. He's going to expose the pedos, right? It met emotional needs until it didn't. And then when it stopped meeting emotional needs, people dropped it. So right now, there's a lot of energy and kudos and applause and many incentives for populist nationalists on the right to say things against Israel. And then the situation's going to change. It may start changing tomorrow, it may start changing next year, but the situation will change. And another enemy will occupy them. Maybe it'll be China or Russia or Muslims or DEI consultants. Right? The easiest, quickest, most effective way to bond is to share an enemy. And every alliance, every group has enemies. But those enemies don't usually stay stable. They change over time.
Skip through ideas.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the question of whether Tucker like believes what he says, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of irrelevant. Like he's saying it and people believe that he believes it, and that's what matters. I mean, I do think that if he did start off saying this stuff cynically, it's only human nature that having been rewarded for saying these things and sort of living in this bubble of affirmation, which I think is something that happens.
Pundits, opinion makers, people on TV, people who host podcasts and live streams, right? You don't get rewarded for being right. You get rewarded for being interesting. And if saying anti-Israel things is interesting, people will say anti-Israel things. When saying something else creates more buzz, more intensity, more energy, more of a following is more interesting, then people will switch to a new enemy.
Certainly in television, and now I think has happened in his own life because, you know, you're right. He's on an island in Maine and he's on an island in Florida. His world is really constricted. You know, I think when he was still living in Washington and, you know, rubbing elbows with like Hunter Biden or whatever, maybe he had a broader social circle, a broader world.
Well, I guess this is to the point, right? Like, I'm a social creature, and so I'm always looking for social answers to all this stuff. And like, I think that it's actually good to see other humans. It's important to like be with them face to face. You know, it softens you in various ways. And you're saying he was that in DC. Like he was a party goer. And now it's like, does he even have friends anymore? When you're writing about that one time where he bought a thing at an auction to have dinner with Bill Ayers or something.
Yeah.
And, you know, he invited Andrew Breitbart, who's dead now, his brother, Matt Labash, who writes a Substack that is great. People should read. It's very bulwarky. Unclear to me the extent of their friendship at this point, but certainly can't possibly be as close as it once was.
Yeah.
And then a staffer. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, and he's in rural Maine in this house. Like, does he talk to anybody besides his wife and brother? You know,
I think he does. Yeah, but I think it's a completely different set of people. I mean, I think he used to talk to, you know, Matt Labash. He used to talk to Bill Kristol. He used to talk to, you know, those folks at Jake Tapper. I mean, now I think he talks to Don Jr. and, you know, Theo Vaughn and, you know, the Nelk boys.
He can't possibly be friends with Don Jr. I guess that's what I'm saying. You look at that other crew, like Andrew Breitbart is smart. He might have been a bad person, but he was smart. Matt Labash is smart. Buckley seems crazy, but like is red. Don Jr. is.
No, he's friends with Don Jr.
Come on.
He is.
What would they talk about?
Hunting.
John Jr. is a moron. What could they possibly talk about?
They talk about hunting and, you know,
hunting.
Politics. Yeah. I mean, they're.
So when Tucker Carlson with his childhood friend Neil Patel were raising money for the Daily Caller, they were able to raise about $3 million from venture capital, but it came with so many conditions. Tucker and Neil thought there has to be an easier way. So they went to this eccentric billionaire, Foster Friess, who was also a big funder of PragerU. And Foster Friess was willing to give them $3 million to start the Daily Caller, but on the condition that the two men went hunting with him once a year. Now, I was just thinking, what if someone offered me $3 million, but on the condition that I go hunting with them one day a year? On the one hand, hunting is forbidden by Jewish law. On the other hand, $3 million is $3 million. Think about all the mitzvahs, all the good deeds I could do if I had $3 million, how I could make the case for Israel and help support yeshivas. And all I have to do is commit an avera, a sin, one day a year and go hunting with some eccentric goy billionaire. I wonder if I could get a heksher, a rabbinic permission to do that.
Like legit friends, and he's legit friends with JD Vance. I mean that, I think that's like a real relationship. It's obviously an incredibly close political relationship, but I think there's a personal relationship there in a way that he doesn't have with Trump. I mean, I think he likes Trump a lot, and Trump likes him, and I think they sort of get along because they're fun together. But I think Vance, that's a real friendship, at least at the moment. You look concerned. I'm Scott. There's, I think it's not concern. There's just it's not unreasonable to think that Tucker is a sociopath. And how else could you live through all this stuff and that these aren't possibly real friendships? And I find it hard to believe that he has a real friendship with Don Jr. I mean, Don Jr. has Forrest Gump level IQ, and Tucker is a smart, learned person. And I guess maybe they could talk about hunting. But the J.D. Vance one is obviously more important. And his son works for J.D. And he was pretty, I guess, the story is not apocryphal that he convinced Trump that the deep state would kill him if Trump picked someone besides JD. Is that?
Okay, let's leave it there for right now. I'll talk to you later, mate. Bye-bye.